The Innkeeper by Life Sketcher. Chapter 181 Wedding Blades. Mary looked at Lex with a mix of frustration and pride. It frustrated her at how critically he was questioning her, but at the same time she was proud of how careful he was being. The system really was an entity that was beyond Lex's understanding. It let him confuse beings so much more powerful than him that currently, Lex could not even properly comprehend how weak he was. Using the system, he was affecting events on a galactic scale, if not universal yet. So an adequate amount of prudence was a good thing. It just made things slightly awkward for her. I can answer that question, there is a bit of leeway there. But if I answer it, you'll be able to draw a lot of conclusions, Lex. And those conclusions won't be any good for you, and will in fact get in the way of your growth. So, if you trust me, then I would give you the advice to stop asking questions about the system until you are much stronger. I'd say the minimum acceptable level would be Ragnar's. But if you still want to know, I can answer. Lex wondered for just a moment, then dropped the matter. For better or for worse, he was stuck with the system. Even if it wanted to harm him, there was nothing he could do about it. Waiting until he got stronger was the correct move. Lex clapped his hands and jumped off the bed. Alright then, let's get to work. With that, both Lex and Mary disappeared from the White Room and returned to Lex's apartment. Anything important happen while I was asleep? A group of pirates entered the inn. I don't know where they got the golden keys from, but they left as soon as they were sober enough to understand that our guards were stronger than them. They didn't cause too much trouble though, so that's good. Other than that, the 4th Golden Core Midnight game is currently going on. Tomorrow will be the last match, so you woke up just in time. Other than that, not much related to the inn has happened. Blaine was looking for you, but you weren't available, so he said he would wait. He said he wanted to meet you privately, without his companions finding out. Blaine, Lex muttered as he scanned the inn, and found the man sitting in the guild room with Chen, Lily and Iris, and watching the match. Alright, have his personal hologram tell him I'm available. If he wants to see me privately, he should step outside the room and I'll summon him to me. The message was passed along, and a few minutes later, Blaine excused himself and stepped out of the guild room. Lex teleported him, but not to Lex's bedroom where he was when he sent the message. Blaine appeared in a secluded campsite on Midnight Mountain, overlooking the rest of the inn. Lex was already sitting on a bench, staring out at his inn. I hope you did not have to wait too long, Lex said, without turning back. At the moment, looking at the inn, he was feeling extremely emotional and didn't feel like putting up a front. Not at all. You must have many matters to take care of. I apologize for disturbing you. Lex did not correct him, nor did he dissuade him from the excessive flattery as he usually would. He simply said, How can I help you, Blaine? Blaine felt slightly awkward bringing up his request, but eventually worked up the courage. I was hoping to get married to Iris, at the inn. But I didn't know if you would allow that here, and I don't exactly know how to get married either. Lex was startled by the revelation, and looked at Blaine in wonder. He supposed it made sense, considering how much the man loved the woman. Lex just somehow never considered that someone might want to get married at his inn. Well, of course, you can have a wedding. What do you mean you don't know how to get married? Don't they have weddings back at Vegas Minima? People remember marriages, but, the way life was, it's probably been over 100 years since anyone got married. After all, your partner could die the next day. Not to mention, there was no shortage of other problems to worry about. That isn't to say that there weren't any couples. But, at least I don't remember seeing anyone get married. Even Chen and Lily, their parents, probably weren't married. Wait, they probably don't even share both parents. Lex was both amazed and filled with pity at listening to Blaine's story. Do you have anything in mind about how you want to do it? Or would you like some suggestions? I don't know how it's supposed to be done, but I have an idea. I wanted to. Blaine discussed his marriage plan with Lex, and as simplistic as it was, for warriors such as them, Lex felt like it was perfect. Blaine let Lex know that he had taken a loan from Chen for the wedding, and would pay whatever the inn charged. Although technically this was an event, and Lex planned on using the event panel to hold the wedding, he only charged Blaine 1 MP for the wedding. He wouldn't be so sentimental if the wedding had been happening at any other time, but currently he was very emotional and did not feel like charging the man for his wedding. If Alexander could get up and go to war on a whim, why couldn't Lex sponsor a wedding on one? Go back, I'll prepare things. We'll start at night, Lex said, and then sent Blaine back. If he was gone too long, his friends might start wondering where he was. Lex teleported to the absolute peak of the Midnight Mountain. The peak was barely a dozen feet across and had nothing except snow. Furthermore, it was forever surrounded by clouds, making it invisible for anyone to view. But the peak also contained a secret Lex had prepared for any curious adventurers who climbed so far, but the secret would only reveal itself if the guests climbed manually and did not fly over or somehow use their cultivation. Actually, the surprise was likely not a big deal to high-leveled cultivators, but Lex liked it nonetheless. Once someone climbed to the peak, if the secret activated, they would be able to climb the clouds as well, as if they were solid, until they climbed to the top of the cloud. The view was a sea of clouds, illuminated by hundreds of sky lanterns. There was no need to embellish. As to Lex, the sight was absolutely amazing. Lex activated the event panel and started the second event, which was Blaine's wedding. He built a small stage on top of the clouds, with a simple bonfire in the middle. The warrior did not want roses or flowers, he wanted simple and straightforward. Though getting married on top of a literal cloud was anything but straightforward, Lex could not help himself from upscaling the wedding a little. Then, using the event panel, he made 2 silver-colored daggers, each engraved with a name. Making these daggers was the real reason Lex wanted to use the event panel, as these were mementos related to the event. Without it, Lex would not be able to make them. They were nothing too special and had no attacking power over a normal dagger. But they would last. A few hours later, once the match was over and night had fallen, Blaine asked his friends to follow him. Curious about why their friend was acting so mysterious, they followed him to the base of the mountain, where the innkeeper was waiting. "Are you ready?" the innkeeper asked. "Yes," Blaine replied simply. With that, the innkeeper gave a simple nod and teleported Blaine, Chen, Lily and Iris along with himself to the stage on top of the clouds. For a few minutes, everyone was stunned by the sight, as they had never witnessed anything like it. A cold wind blew over the clouds, but the gentle warmth of the bonfire kept everyone comfortable. "Blaine, what is this?" Iris asked, finally turning to look at her boyfriend. That's when she noticed that while everyone else was looking at the lanterns floating in the sky, as if stars that were within reach, Blaine was only looking at her. "Iris, I cannot say that the thought has never crossed my mind, but the time was never right," Blaine began. By now, Chen and Lily were also observing him as an idea of what might be happening crept in their minds. Whether it was war or famine, or zombies or hunters, the future was too uncertain, and I did not want to make a promise that I would eventually break. But things are different now, and our lives have changed. Yet even if they had not changed, I would have no doubt in my mind that the reason I live, the reason I fight, the reason I survive is for you. He took the silver knife that had his name on it from Lex, and cut the palm of his hand, staining the blade with his blood. "I do not have much to give you, Iris, only the blood in my body. But if you will have me, then everything that is mine will be yours. Iris, will you be my wife?" Blaine held out the dagger to her with his bleeding hand, the drops of his blood falling into the clouds. For a moment, Iris was too dazed to respond, but when she came to, she quickly cut her hand on the other dagger and exchanged it with Blaine. Before the man could spew more nauseating romantic lines, Iris had hurled herself into Blaine's arms and kissed him furiously. Throughout the process, Lex never got the opportunity to speak at all, and it appeared that he did not need to ordain the event. Just like that, with a simple exchange of blood and daggers, the first Vigus Minima wedding in over 100 years took place amongst the clouds. Lex did not receive any notifications or requests from the system, but he did not care. While he did not understand the metric with which the system judged events as important, he knew that he would remember this simple wedding forever. Chapter 182 Chi Training. Once the small wedding was over, Lex returned to his room and went to his study. Although, according to Mary, not many big things happened at the inn while he was asleep, there were many things for him to do. First of all, the midnight games will come to a close tomorrow. Once they concluded, many of the benefits he had been retaining would come to a close. Lex needed to plan accordingly. His first priority was security, but Mary advised him to put that on hold till after the event. When he asked her why, she only stated that the system would prevent her from answering. Since her advice about the bodyguard had been so valuable, he decided to trust her once again on this. The next item on Lex's list was the personal holographic assistant every guest received upon entering the inn. Although those personal assistants could not do any actual work, they were great at answering questions and disseminating information. Unfortunately, while they were cheap to procure during an event, buying them permanently was extremely expensive. In the end, Lex decided to purchase holographic assistants with only very basic capabilities as a permanent addition to the inn for 500,000 MP. These holograms would answer basic questions, but could not do all the additional tasks such as provide a place for a private conversation, like Lex had with Larry, or send messages to other guests. The third concern Lex had was rooms. While he did not go and buy a few more skyscrapers, he started planning for them already. When the time came, he would be able to directly make the changes he'd planned and thus avoid doing things haphazardly. To cater to his preliminary vision, the size of the inn would also need to be expanded, but obviously that was expensive. He needed to divide his MP between expansion of the inn and construction of properties, and would do so based on his requirements. So, he would build and expand in phases. This was especially important because while he was earning an average of 1 million MP a day, he expected to see that number fall once the games ended. This was because a majority of that income was from food and gambling. Lex worked directly through the night as he compiled plans, not only for the inn, but for himself. He made himself a priority list so that instead of doing things randomly, he could make a focused effort towards getting certain results. The priority list was 1. Security. 2. Lex's own cultivation. 3. More infrastructure to cater to guests. 4. More managers so he could effectively divide tasks and not overburden his AI. 5. Teachers, not for his guests but for his staff. Lex expected to be in a state of constant expansion for the foreseeable future, and the AI he hired only came with basic knowledge. He wanted teachers who could constantly raise the quality of his staff and services. The lack wasn't so evident now, but that was only because his services were limited. 6. Entertainment for his guests. Only after the basic and important requirements to host a guest were fulfilled could he start thinking of entertainment. 7. Expansion. Ideally, he would expand before a need for it arose, so that he was always one step ahead, but a lot of it would depend on his MP expenditure. For now, this is all he had on the list. He might add more items to the list, or revise the order of things as he saw fit, but it would serve him well at the moment. It was important that he keep reminding himself of this because an unorganized way of doing things would be inefficient, and Lex did not want to slow down at all as he was now determined to raise his strength. Another correction he decided to make was how he behaved while in the Innkeeper persona. Previously, he was obsessed with letting everyone think that he was incredibly powerful and mysterious. However, this was a knee-jerk reaction caused by his own insecurity at being so weak while being surrounded by those so strong. In his mind, when he envisioned an innkeeper, the image he had in his head was someone very close to the ground level, and someone who had a good relationship with his guests and clients. Though he could not suddenly change his persona, Lex planned to slowly become more approachable instead of enigmatic. With all his planning for the inn taken care of, there were still a few hours until the last match began. This gave Lex just enough time to do something he was very excited about: start cultivating. From now on, his cultivation would no longer be in the hands of the system and would require him to make his own efforts. In a way, this was tougher. But Lex preferred not to be too dependent on the system for stuff like this. He left his study and went to the place where he usually meditated and sat down, cross-legged. He closed his eyes and began meditating. This was not cultivation, but would help him hone his state of mind for when he did. For this next part, he did not need any guidance from Mary, as the regal embrace had provided him with the relevant information on how to proceed. The body tempering realm, for humans, was about tempering the body internally to make it capable of absorbing and storing spiritual energy. An increase in strength and stamina was only a side effect of such a process, and not the preliminary purpose. As a result of this, depending on how one cultivated, there were often mortal athletes who were stronger and more physically fit than body-tempering cultivators. This is why, on the first day Lex started his self-defense training, he felt like some of his peers lacked in the fitness department. Lex, of course, was strengthened to the extreme due to the prowess of his cultivation technique. It was important to note that this description was only fit for spiritual cultivation, as body cultivators obviously honed their bodies well. Furthermore, if one wanted to be a body cultivator, while the stages were the same, the effects were different. It was exactly for this reason why, if someone wanted to dual cultivate spirit and body, they had to start both together as the body would undergo various changes in each stage. If, for example, someone reached the golden core in spiritual cultivation, then decided to start cultivating their body, not only would they be unable to do so, chances were high it would even negatively affect your spiritual cultivation. There were, of course, exceptions to everything, and maybe there were ways in the universe that would allow a person to start body cultivating at a later stage. But, in general, that was the exception and not the rule. Encountering such a situation could only be based on luck. Naturally, none of that mattered to someone like Lex who would, henceforth, cultivate his spirit, body and soul all at once. The next stage of cultivation was called chi training. It did not matter much, but chi was just another name for spirit energy. To be more specific, a single strand of spiritual energy was called chi. In the various worlds, spiritual energy took on various names, and thus the cultivation levels were often called differently as well. Fortunately for Lex, his universal translator would translate all the different terminology into the same few words. The reason for the next stage being called chi training was because, since the body had only just become capable of withstanding the presence of spiritual energy inside it, a cultivator would begin by only absorbing a single strand into their body at a time. Even then, with having only absorbed a single strand, the cultivator had to be very careful. This was because the body maintained an internal pressure that prevented the spiritual energy flowing around it from entering inside. By absorbing a strand of spiritual energy, or chi, the cultivator was actively pushing against this internal pressure. This was a delicate process, as cultivators would be required to constantly break through the limits of their body by absorbing chi, but at the same time if they were too rough, the increase in pressure could cause a meridian in the body to rupture, which would severely damage the body. In extreme cases, if too much chi was absorbed, the body could even explode, the reason why Bluebird tested Lex's cultivation. Such a test did not eliminate the possibility of something like that happening, but at least a faulty cultivation technique would no longer be the cause for it. Meridians were extremely important, as they were the vessels in the body that allowed chi to flow through them, the way veins and arteries transported blood. Without meridians, or with damaged meridians, it was obvious that one would not be able to cultivate. In fact, the very reason Larry had been unable to cultivate was because he was born without meridians whatsoever, though people did not know that fact. They only knew he could not cultivate from birth. What Lex needed to do to go from body-tempering realm to the chi-training realm was simply to sense spiritual energy. That's right, he didn't even need to absorb it yet. As soon as he was able to sense the energy with his body, he would officially break through the realm and finally begin his cultivation journey. The process for sensing spiritual energy was described clearly by Regal Embrace, and once he had calmed his mind and entered the most suitable state of mind, he began. For minutes later, Lex, for the first time in his life, sensed spiritual energy and broke through to the chi training realm. Chapter 183 Balaam. Typically, while the realm had changed, something as simple as just sensing spiritual energy should not provide an increase in strength or capability. Yet that was not the case because what was happening was more than the body simply sensing spiritual energy. A simplified explanation of it would be that the body was awakening. This was because, while during the body tempering spiritual energy was used to temper the body, the cultivator could not actually feel the spiritual energy, just the effects of it. So when a cultivator entered the chi-gathering realm, the action they performed was only sensing the energy for the first time, but the result was quite a bit more. The cultivator usually senses the energy for the first time on his or her skin, and that initiates an automatic process whereby the body starts absorbing spiritual energy. This spiritual energy does not count towards cultivation, and is instead absorbed by the body itself as it is elevated to a higher stage of existence. This elevation, in turn, would allow the cultivator to sense the chi that entered their body henceforth, and even use the internal pressure of their body to manipulate the movement of the chi within their body. The movement of chi in certain ways was necessary to use spiritual techniques. So, ultimately, that elevation to a higher stage of existence is what strengthened cultivators when they transitioned through realms. For Lex, the spiritual energy absorbed did a lot more. His soul, spirit, and body had been melded together under an external force, but the spiritual energy being absorbed now was finalizing the process. Once the process was complete, Lex would forever be different from all cultivators in the rest of the universe. This is when the true power of the cultivation technique with the strongest defense would start to show. While the transition in the realm happened almost instantly, Lex remained seated for another hour before his ascendance was completed. When Lex opened his eyes and finally regained control of his body, he shuddered. The process of his soul, spirit and body melding was extremely painful, yet somehow it was the kind of pain one liked. The more he felt it, the more he enjoyed it. He shuddered because he had a flashback of Marlowe calling him a masochist. But he wasn't. Honest. Lex stood up, and all the bones in his body let out satisfying cracks as he moved. He stretched his limbs and tried to sense the difference. But, once his body had finished adjusting to the changes, he only felt normal. In fact, he felt like he had better and more precise control of his body than ever before. This was just one of the many side effects of his existence, going from being into 3 different forms to joining into a single one. He wished he could have had more time to experiment, but the last match was about to begin and Lex wanted to watch it in the Colosseum with the crowds. He had to suppress his longing to experiment with spiritual techniques, test out his strength and even play online games with his newly developed reflexes. He would definitely do all those things once he had the time. For now, he only had one thing left that he had to do first. He opened the event management panel and looked at the prize for games. Originally, he was going to go for the second cheapest option, since the cheapest already had such a positive reaction. But he also understood that to get, you also had to give. The better the reward he gave out this time, the more participation he could expect next time. He looked at his total MP which, by now, had accumulated to 9,430,675. After a moment's consideration, he spent 1,430,675 MP on upgrading the final reward. A small bonus to anyone suffering from OCD was that he was left with an even 8 million MP. Once that was done, Lex donned his suit, looked at himself in the mirror, admiring his own dashing good looks, and was off. When he arrived at the Colosseum, the match had already begun. By now Harriet, the zombie leader, like Pramod, and long since stopped participating in the matches. While that made the battle easier, considering the severe lack of forces from Earth, each of the battles was extremely tough. Still, while Golden Core zombies were more formidable, it was a fact that zombies were inherently weaker than most beings at their level. With the Jotun forces' steady attacks and the beast's savagery, they had won all the previous matches, and it seemed like the trend would continue. While somewhat watching the match, Lex also paid attention to the various guests in the Colosseum. It was mostly empty, as people watched from the comfort of their rooms or wherever they happened to be. But a few groups still watched in the Colosseum. He noticed that the two people who sat beside him on the first day, Remy, the guy who wanted to have meetings for a secret society, and Akihiko, the influential man from Japan who chose not to cultivate for some reason, were seated side by side, chatting. There was a large group from Earth that consisted of a few core members, and the rest were merely their entourages. Surprisingly, there was one group that Lex summarized from snooping on their conversations, that consisted of beasts from Earth, Vegas Minima and Nibiru. Lex recalled that Golden Hair had once requested everyone that they summon beasts from their respective planets, and it had finally happened, though Lex did not understand his incentive for doing this. The largest group consisted of a mix of people and beast alike who were discussing their bets. It seemed there were a few core favorites that most bet on who seemed to perform well consistently. Rorik was, of course, one of them, but his points were too low. He fought very slowly and casually, though he always won and avoided all injuries. He also never tried to attack the node, and so had no contributions to boost his points. The biggest bet regarding him wasn't if he would die, but rather how many zombies he would kill before the game ended. Suddenly, while Lex was enjoying watching his guests mingle, he got a very loud and abrupt notification from the system. Warning. Entity capable of detecting system signature detected. Going into hibernation mode. The very next moment, Lex realized that he had lost his connection to the system and all its features. It was fortunate that the host attire kept its functions, but Lex was scarcely able to do anything at the moment. He noticed, then, with the power of the suit, that two men had exited their rooms in the Colosseum and were approaching him. Perhaps if this had been before his breakthrough, Lex would have panicked at the sudden turn of events, but right now he was in complete control of himself. He wouldn't even need the host attire's help to control his facial expressions. So, instantly, he decided to play it casually, as if he were in a good mood. He turned to look at the two guests but did not recognize them, but gave them a warm smile anyway. If the system had not been suppressed, his scan would have shown him that one of the men was actually Loretta in disguise. "I hope you've been enjoying yourselves," Lex said calmly, as he turned his attention back towards the screen. "Yes, my small vacation has been very informative. It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance. My name is Balam, I'm Loretta's father." "You may call me the Innkeeper," Lex replied as he turned to look, not at Balam, but at the other man. Lex assumed this man was Loretta in disguise, since Balam had brought her up, but did not say anything. "Innkeeper, I was looking forward to your finale, but an urgent task has required my attention and so I must leave. It appears, some trouble has been brewing in the uncharted territories of space. I wish you well then, on your journey. If you ever need to rest while on your journey, please come again." Balloon had been staring closely at the Innkeeper, trying to pry some information from his reactions, but got nothing. It was true that there was some trouble brewing for the devils, but what he wanted to see is if this trouble had something to do with the way the Innkeeper reacted that one time. It seemed that either it was unrelated, or the Innkeeper kept his matters close to his chest. "Farewell then, I look forward to seeing you again. I hope that next time, I may invite you over to try our hospitality." Lex merely smiled, but gave no response. A few moments later, both Loretta and the man disappeared. A familiar ting went off in his head as the system gave him a notification. System is back online. Before Lex could ask any questions though, Mary appeared in front of him, filled with excitement. "I can't believe how lucky you are," she exclaimed. "Your reward for this quest will be huge." Chapter 184 Hell's Butcher makes his move. "I'm lucky? What do you mean? And what happened to the system?" "Yes, you're extremely lucky. That man, don't think of his name or he might sense it, was an incredibly powerful cultivator. He was even stronger than Batet, who, by the way, was the sole reason your quest was upgraded enough for you to receive the regal embrace. Now imagine what influence someone even stronger than Batet would have on your quest reward for this quest." Even if he didn't do anything, just merely entering the inn during the period of the event should be more than enough to upgrade your rewards. At the same time, however, his incredibly high cultivation level is also the reason why the system had to go into hibernation. The chances were very high that a cultivator of his level would be able to detect the system if he came close enough and the system were still active. Mary's reply was more or less what Lex imagined it would be. It was disturbing to know that his system could be exposed just by being close to certain cultivators, but there really wasn't anything Lex could do about that at the moment, so he stopped worrying about it. Ironically, his reaction was a lot more calm than his own bodyguard. The Celestial was practically sweating buckets worth, even when his system came back online. Unlike Lex, the Celestial's authority with his system was a lot higher, so he knew a lot more about it, and the risks involved in having the system be detected. At the same time, he was also stressed because this was the first time he had encountered a being on that level. Not that there weren't other Celestials who had reached that realm, there were, but Celestials were so rare that even he had not met another in his long life. His longevity also spoke about how rare it was to encounter a being at such a level. Yet after the fear faded, the Celestial was filled with endless ambition. Reaching the same level as that being was his goal, and the system provided him with an opportunity to do that, which is exactly why he was so concerned about raising his system's level. One day, he too would reach that realm. Although Lex had relaxed, he was not happy about the fact that such a being had been in his inn, and Lex had never even realized it. It wasn't Lex's fault really, considering that even though the attire made him aware of everything that was happening at the inn, unless he focused on it specifically, he would not be conscious of it. It was like how a person was always aware of the condition of their whole body, yet they probably wouldn't pay attention to something like the third toe on their left foot unless an itch or pain attracted their attention to it specifically. So, while he was still free, he started scanning the inn more thoroughly. Each sweep he performed slower than before, and paid attention to guests more to get an idea of who they were or what they were doing. In true anticlimactic fashion, he discovered no other hiding experts, nor did he discover any secret meetings or impending conspiracies. The closest thing to a secret meeting was the family heads from Earth, convening yet again to make plans, except Brandon, of course. Lex found it very curious to learn that Earth was secretly being controlled by some people out in the universe, that they were the ones responsible for keeping the peace that ensured cultivators did not kill mortals. At the same time, though, Lex had learnt so many secrets about the universe that he was not too surprised. He didn't pay it much mind and stopped paying attention to them. He had to admit, albeit reluctantly, that other than their cultivation, these family heads really didn't have much going for them. They had easily been threatened into not returning to Earth by the Council, and put their hopes in the fact that many years of service to Fernanda would ensure their return to power. Who could have guessed they would be discarded so easily? On the bright side, they had been informed that the threat of the nuclear bombs had been removed, and should they want to retake power, so long as they do not cause heavy casualties amongst the mortals, they would not be stopped. Unfortunately, there would be very targeted arrays and formations waiting for them the moment they returned to Earth. They were currently planning on how to overcome this obstacle. But, considering they still did not even know about Marlowe's increase in cultivation, Lex did not expect much from them. He turned his mind away from them and focused on the rest of his guests. The Jotun presence was completely ready to evacuate once the games ended. In fact, many of the soldiers had already left. The beasts from Nibiru weren't particularly interested in the inn anyway, and were only coming due to the pressure from Golden Hair, and could not wait to return. For better or worse, it seemed like after a busy few weeks, the inn would return to relative calm after the games. That would give him an opportunity to focus more on each guest specifically. While planning things, he continued to watch the match as well. As expected, the beasts were in the lead. Lex paid special attention to the beasts so that he could learn as much about them as possible. At the same time, something he had only done today when his thoughts were flowing more smoothly was to connect his fancy monocle to a monitor that surveyed the entire inn. This way, his monocle's database would increase at an exponential level, and be more useful to him in his ventures to new planets. Just like that, with Lex scanning his inn and occasionally watching the match, with the guests mingling amongst themselves or going about their day, the final match came to a close. With 2,500 Jotun soldiers, 1,879 beasts and 144 earthlings remaining at the end of the final match, the node was destroyed. The participants were teleported back, some tired, some wounded, some dying, and some completely unharmed. While the participants were being taken care of, all the leaders turned their attention towards the Innkeeper, who had once again appeared center stage, with all the screens focused on him. What an immaculate performance by all our valiant participants. Such ferocity and camaraderie were truly a splendid sight to see, not in the least when it gave birth to yet another story of the righteous triumphing over evil. I could praise their efforts endlessly, yet, I think, they are more interested in their prize than mere words. Lex's performance this time was coming off much more friendly this time, despite their vast gap in status to all his guests. This was mostly due to a shift in his own mindset, but also because now he was not so desperately hoping to fall into the state of flow he sometimes encountered. Now, Lex did not need external aid as he himself was enough for this small task. Without any further ado, I announce the winner of the Midnight Games, the Beasts of Nibiru. As the innkeeper's voice echoed, thousands of beasts broke into a cacophony of roars. They were looked down upon in the beginning for their ignorance, but ignorant as they may be, whether on their planet or over here, they reigned the strongest. For these individual beasts, the prize did not mean nearly as much as the validation of this mysterious being. Yet the sloth gazed upon Lex with expectant eyes. Though the winner has been announced, the award ceremony will be held in 6 hours. This is so that all those whose valiant efforts gave us this result may be able to recover, and receive the proper award with honor and dignity. With that, the innkeeper once again disappeared, much to the sloth's distress. But it recovered quickly, as a few hours changed nothing. It was also true that this would give the participants enough time to recover and be present at the ceremony in a much better condition. Lex did it this way because, though they would get no individual awards, he wanted to give them some recognition. So, while it was not technically an award, he prepared something for the exceptional performers. So, while during these final moments everyone got ready for the ceremony, back on Vegas Minima, Ragnar had struck with relentless fury. As soon as the final node was destroyed, the ships orbiting the planet detected the unique signature of the spawning portal. With the formation threatening to destroy the planet if a high-leveled cultivator struck being disabled, finally unleashed his complete strength. When Hell's Butcher made his move, why would anyone else's support be necessary? The troops stood by as he eradicated the largest zombie hordes on the entire planet with nothing but a cleaver. 5 hours later, while there were still some zombies left on the planet, they weren't nearly the threat they had been previously. With plenty of time to spare, Ragnar took a nice, long shower, adorned his military uniform, and went to the Midnight Inn to watch the award ceremony. A couple of moments after he appeared, the ceremony finally began. Author's note: read the creator's thoughts below for some important information. Chapter 185 Simple Days. In the haunted forest, as some of the kids from Earth had started calling it, Helen sat alone. Well, she wasn't alone if you counted the various peacocks, pigeons and squirrels that followed her. Though they did not need to rely on her to be fed, as they did in the early days of the inn, they continued to follow her whenever they encountered her. They had formed a friendship that none of the new or recent guests at the inn could form. Helen did not mind, and in fact sort of preferred the company of these simple animals these days. She wanted to change something in her life, and until she figured out what exactly that was, she would spend her time like this. Sometimes, she imagined herself to be like those cartoon princesses that all the forest creatures loved and responded to. But she was no princess, nor did she want to be one. She was sitting on a picnic blanket, and Velma had brought her a lovely basket full of sandwiches, pastries, some drinks, as well as some things she could feed the animals. Sometimes Velma would accompany her and ask her so many questions. In those days, Helen would share some stories of her childhood and school days with her. Though technically Velma was still in a school-going age, she hadn't been back in a while. Velma especially loved gossip of any kind, and the more scandalous, the better. Yet, somehow, Helen felt like they had very different understandings of what constituted scandalous. The most outrageous scandal, according to Velma, that Helen had shared so far was once when their school organized a trip, but due to poor planning, left all the kids alone in a hotel unsupervised. The scandalous part, for Velma, was the abysmal service the hotel had provided to those annoying, bratty teenage kids. Today, though, Velma was too busy to join her, so Helen was back to her regular activities. Or so she had thought. Normally, she would be playing with the animals and eating her snacks, but today her focus was on something else entirely. One of her little squirrel friends had brought her here and shown her something wonderful. It had had squirrel babies. Unbeknownst to all, these were the first beings to be born in the inn, and could be called true natives of this wondrous land. Helen only smiled and watched the new squirrel parents as they fussed over their babies and proudly showed them off to her. The sleeping babies were nestled in the mother's embrace, who seemed to be gloating at all the other squirrels watching. If she didn't know better, Helen could almost believe the other squirrels looked at her with envious looks. But she did know better, so why did she still think they were jealous? This kind of behavior may seem unlike a normal squirrel, and though these squirrels had not yet cultivated, they were to some degree influenced by that once colossal change the inn had undergone that had scared Botat away. If one day they began to cultivate, they would be true prodigies. For now, they were simply proud parents that had a complex understanding of social relations between species, and knew how to make others jealous. "You're not chipmunks," Helen said as she looked down on the babies fondly, "but I'll name you Alvin, you can be Theodore and you can be Simon. When you grow up, you can sing and put on a performance for me, and I will bring you delicious food from the inn." Of course, no one other than her would know these names, but who cared? Helen had given names not only to these babies, but to many of the animals as well. Today is a day that calls for celebration. "Let's have a feast." She summoned her personal hologram and ordered a rather extravagant order of pet food, before holding her own feast for her furry friends. She made plates out of leaves and made all the animals sit around the picnic basket before beginning. They seemed to be unusually obedient, as well as intelligent. She did not need to repeat her orders even once. In the distance, Little Blue watched all the fun as it hid between the trees. It was too shy to approach on its own, but enjoyed watching all the fun, nonetheless. It had often seen Helen in the forest, and though she seemed nice, it still had a phobia of most humans. Secretly, in its heart, the baby whale wished Helen would discover it, and force it to join in their activities. Yet it was too good at hiding, and Helen never expected anyone to be spying on her, so its secret fantasies were left unfulfilled. All the hubbub of the tea party eventually woke the baby squirrels, and Alvin looked at Helen with curious eyes. Its parents talked to it and its brothers, as if explaining that Helen was their godmother. Helen smiled at them, but did not try to touch or pick them up. As much as she trusted the animals, being protective of newborns was a very strong instinct ingrained in all living beings, and she did not want to agitate them. She just waved and took a bite from an eclair. As unusual as it sounded, and as strange as it may seem to an outsider to view, Helen truly felt happy during these short moments. She forgot to worry about the future and forgot the troubles of her past. The expectations she had for herself slipped away, followed quickly by the weight of the expectations of others. In a small corner of the vast universe, these simple beings enjoyed their simple happinesses. Their activities neither touched upon the destiny of worlds, nor influenced the grand scheme of things, yet in these simple moments of shared joy, they captured one of the most profound meanings of life, one that often escaped even the wisest of beings. Chapter 186 Endings. The award ceremony kicked off with a display of fireworks over the Colosseum. It was nothing too fancy visually, compared to some of the big displays Lex had seen on Earth, but he noticed for the first time that the fireworks he had been setting off gave a unique fluctuation in spiritual energy that was pleasant to experience. Who could have guessed? Other than the sound of the fireworks, and the dazzling lights, another sensation had been added to the ones at the inn. This made them wonderful in their simplicity. After admiring the fireworks for a moment, he looked at the massive crowd. He recalled the nervousness he had felt the first day. He recalled how he had stressed over every single exchange, every conversation. He remembered his panic when the zombies had entered the inn, followed by the devils revealing themselves. It was not so long ago, yet at the same time Lex felt like so much had changed since. His inn had changed a lot during that time, and so had he. The Colosseum was packed with beasts and humans alike, all looking at him. In one particular corner, Pramod, Harriet, Creel and Azure sat and watched as well. Well, at least some of them were watching him. Harriet's attention was solely focused on Rorik, whom she was pining for. He noticed a few of his other guests that had stood out to him as well during this period, but Lex only chuckled and moved on, otherwise he'd spend the whole chapter, no, the whole day reminiscing. Dear guests, we are gathered here once again, finally, to end this small interlude in our lives that has been the Midnight Games. I think by now you will know that I am not one for long ceremonies, so we'll get right to the matters we have all been waiting for. P.N.A. Novel, the first order of business is to recognize that while for many of us, this was but a small interlude, for many, it was the end of a journey. They may not have wished for it, but regardless, they have become heroes for the people of a land, and so I commemorate them with this statue, so that their names may be remembered till the end of time. He waved his hand, a 15-feet-tall statue appeared beside him. Cut from the purest of white marbles, the statue depicted a man with a sword, fighting side by side against an unseen foe with a wolf. They stood upon a rectangular base, upon which the names of all the fallen participants were written, along with a story of how they fought for the freedom of the people of Vegas Minima. Once the event was over, Lex would relocate this statue somewhere else in the inn. After giving a moment for everyone to admire the statue, Lex continued. Now that we have paid respect to those gone, a small commemorative token to those who participated in the games. May you remember your time fondly. Lex snapped his fingers, and all those who participated in the games, whether in the cultural portion or the fighting, received a small golden token with the words Midnight Games engraved into them. The humans received rings, and the beasts received other small ornaments that they could wear in various places on their body depending on their species. Of course, many of those who participated in the games were not at the inn and had returned to their respective planets, but since when had distance stopped the system? And now, finally, for the award that everyone has been anticipating for so long. Lex turned his hand and, like a street magician, revealed the prize in his hand from seemingly nowhere. For the planet Nibiru, and its inhabitants, the prize will be a single drop of Bailey's vitalizing dwarf star ferment. Lex waited a moment to see if anyone recognized the name, but it did not appear to be the case. It appeared that this reward was extremely rare, and not many knew about its existence or use. But that only made sense. When Lex received the reward from the system and read its description, he was amazed. The reward did not look too spectacular, only like a drop of water that had a crystal suspended in the middle. Lex closed his hand into a fist, and the reward disappeared, already being teleported into the core of Nibiru. Since you all do not seem too familiar with the reward, I shall explain, briefly, some of its uses. The dwarf star ferment has already been mixed into the core of Nibiru and will initiate a great change. Not only will it raise the star rating of the planet drastically, over the next few years, and potentially give birth to a planet spirit, but all the natives of Nibiru will gain a massive increase in strength. For beasts, your bloodlines will be refined into the best versions of themselves, or will undergo enhancing mutations. The chances for some beasts being born with some extremely rare bloodline being born will increase greatly, and their cultivation talents will be vastly superior to their peers. As the planet changes, natural treasures will be born with every changing season, and opportunities will fall from the skies like rain in a monsoon. Some people may have felt like Lex was exaggerating a little, but true to his word, he had indeed been extremely brief in the benefits it provided. Only those that lived on the planet would truly understand how much things would change soon. His mind went out to that little girl he had met on Nibiru, Tiffany, who had been called the carrier of the will of Nibiru by the system. She would likely benefit a lot as well, based on his limited understanding of the will of the world and world spirits. The system had provided him with some information on those topics, but not much. But recalling all that would have to wait, as Lex didn't want his thoughts wandering. The same thing had happened to him when read the description for this prize and almost shed tears when learnt that the prize could also be used on a human rather than a planet. Considering how beneficial it was to an entire planet, he could only begin to imagine what it would do for a person. Different guests had different reactions to hearing his description, but Lex only focused on a few. First of all, the devils quickly noted down the benefits and whispered to one another about turning it into a prospective farm. Ragnar's eyes widened when Lex mentioned world spirit, but recovered quickly. The sloth, golden hair, had the greatest reaction, and was grinning as widely as possible. It did not care about any other thing, just the increase in star rating meant that the planet would be able to bear the strength that he was unable to control, and he would be able to spend more time awake from now on. The most curious reaction, however, was by Marlowe. He seemed way too excited for someone who should have no interest in this, since he could never go to Nibiru. What Lex didn't know was that Marlowe's intuition had become extremely strong after his change into a prime human, and his intuition was now telling him that an opportunity for his son's recovery lay on Nibiru after the change. And with that, dear guests, the Midnight Games are concluded. I hope you all enjoyed thoroughly, and had no complaints about your stay at the Midnight Inn. I hope you will remember the inn the next time you are planning a vacation. Contrary to what many expected, the innkeeper did not disappear after his grand announcement, and climbed down from the stage and mingled with the guests. It was mostly some of the guests who wanted to introduce themselves before leaving, but not everyone took this opportunity. Many guests decided they would come and meet the innkeeper later, once the crowd remaining from the event had all gone. And indeed, many guests were leaving quickly. The soldiers had all retreated as they had work to do in clearing out the rest of Vigus Minima. The beasts also quickly disappeared, as they were eager to go home. Ijishima, the tree, had thoroughly enjoyed its time at the games, but it too had to return home. But it saw itself returning often to the inn in the future. After all, it had about 20,000 MP worth of winnings from betting to blow away. Nibiru, Ijishima's personal garden. Tiffany stared out into the large empty patch of land where Ijishima normally slept. From her hiding place inside a hollow portion in a tree, all she could really do was look. If Lex saw her now, he would not recognize her at all. This was not only because she had grown a lot in height and size due to the many fruits she ate that increased her power, but also because of the various scars she wore on her body. She could currently only see out of her left eye, as her right eye was swollen shut. Many of her bones were covered in hairline fractures, and her muscles screamed in pain as if they were being torn apart. In fact, once she had retreated from the latest battlefield and hidden here, her body had completely stopped responding to her. She was paralyzed, at least while her body finished healing. For reasons she did not know, she would always heal very quickly from her wounds. That was the only reason she was still alive. Had Ijishima been here earlier, it could have participated in the defense of what was once the Red Nation. As much as she had prayed for the Lord Protector's return before, she wished just as much that the tree would not return. Yet since when did life go according to one's wishes? With a flash of bright light, Ijishima returned to its home after weeks, feeling good. The feeling lasted barely a moment, as an ambush lay waiting for it. Several nascent-level beasts attacked at once, not giving it any time to defend. Tiffany could only watch with a teary eye as the Lord Protector, once a mighty being that had protected this nation and its people and beasts alike, died and its legacy ended. Back at the inn, Lex received an unusual notification. One of your guests with MP credit at the inn had died. Transferring the MP to the inheritor. Chapter 187. Just the beginning. Lex, who had been conversing with his guests, was extremely confused by the notification, but noting that it was not something urgent, set the matter aside for later. Currently, he was preoccupied with his guests. Seeing that the innkeeper wasn't actually disappearing, and actually greeting his guests, many wanted to take an opportunity to get acquainted. Lex knew for a fact that even with his enhanced mental capabilities, he would never be able to remember all the people he was meeting, but Mary's memory was reliable, so that was his reliance on if he should ever meet them again. It was nearly 5 hours later that Lex finally got some room to breathe. By now, most of the guests were gone. He had gone from several thousand guests to only a few hundred in the span of a few short hours. Even then, of the few hundred, nearly 50 people were those close supporters of the family heads who were too afraid to return home. The Morrison family was still also here, but a few moments of spying let Lex know that they were already forming a plan on how to go back to Mars. Despite ending the event, the Colosseum had not vanished nor had the guards because, contrary to what one might expect, the official end to an event did not actually signify the end of that event. Normally, the end of an event would be followed by the cleanup and packing up of everything. While those were not of any concern to Lex, he had received 24 hours after the end to see off guests and make any arrangements if he needed. This was naturally important, considering that many of his guests had been staying at the Colosseum instead of his actual residences. Once he was done, he considered going back to his room, but then, on second thought, went towards Midnight Manor instead. Rather than teleporting, Lex walked into the restaurant inside and took a seat. Only a few other people were here, as Main Street had started pulling most of the crowds as of late, but that suited Lex just fine. "Would you like something to eat?" asked Velma, who approached the innkeeper. "Bring me whatever was the most popular dish during the midnight games," he told her as he leaned back in his chair. Noting the relative silence in the manor, he recalled that he had been considering hiring a musician, but never got around to it. Not giving it too much thought, he purchased another AI named Frank and had him start playing the piano in the lobby. The few people who were sitting in the restaurant instantly noticed when a soft melody started playing, as if to accompany them for the evening. A lot of them guessed that the innkeeper was in a good mood, but none of them tried to take advantage of it. A few moments later, Lex was served a dish that made him chuckle. How could he have known that the dish that was most popular during the games, enjoyed by humans and beasts alike, was a burrito? Not that it left him with any complaints. For once, Lex enjoyed his meal out in the open, for his guests to see, rather than in the privacy of his room. Currently, he did not look like some overbearing entity that was beyond their comprehension, but like a simple man enjoying a burrito after pulling off a successful event. Once he was done, Lex looked around the room one more time, then disappeared. Of course, before leaving, he also decided to pay for the meals of all the guests who shared the room with him. What was the point of being rich if you couldn't do things like that? Back in his room, Lex ordered 100 more burritos. His new appetite would not be sated with just one, but he didn't want to embarrass himself by eating so much in public, and began looking at his notifications. Much to his surprise, Ijishima was the guest that died. The MP he had in credit had been transferred to his inheritor, whoever that was. That was quite unfortunate. This was probably the first guest that Lex knew of that passed away. He decided that he'd take special care of whoever Ijishima's inheritor was, if he ever met them. Then he looked over the rest of his notifications. Despite his heavy expenditure on the last-minute trinkets and awards, he still ended up making a profit of 780,000 MP during the last day, bringing his total MP to 8,780,000. Now that he had only a few hundred guests left at the moment, he had to be a lot more careful with how he spent it. Next, he went over a deluge of miscellaneous issues and matters, anywhere from how many midnight suits were left, what areas required more AI staff to manage high guest densities, a request from Gerard regarding upgrades to his golf cart and more. To be honest, Lex was filling his time with small, less important matters because he didn't want to do anything big until he received his quest reward. The final wait usually felt the longest, so he kept himself busy so that time would pass faster. Unexpectedly, the day passed by very quickly, and at last the massive Colosseum disappeared from the inn skyline. The hundreds of guards disappeared, and from his hiding spot from which he viewed the entire inn, Lex's personal bodyguard vanished as well. There were literally dozens of things he wanted to do now that the event was over, but first things first, it was time to view his quest rewards. Quest complete. The host rewarded is being calculated. Reward upgraded for having over 1,000 participants. Reward upgraded for having participants many cultivation levels above host. Reward upgraded for attracting attention of several Dao level cultivators. Reward upgraded for changing destiny of 3 planets, Earth, Nibiru, Vegas Minima. Reward upgraded for hosting Dao Lord level guest. Reward upgraded for spreading prestige of inn. Reward demoted for letting gusti. Reward demoted for discriminating against guests, devils plus zombies. Reward rank, SSS plus dash destiny rank achieved. Reward. Authority +1. 1 free in expansion, size double. In star rating plus 0.5. 1 million MP. 1 SSS rank protector recruitment token. Et destiny protection upgrade for in. Unlocked special system feature, special quests. 1 system upgrade, blocked. Remarks, with your tumor gone, who will you blame for your bad decisions? Quickly deploy preparations for the amnesia trope. Notification, system upgrade reward blocked due to unknown errors. Reward being replaced. Reward received, bathroom robe. Notification, set items detected. When items, bathroom slippers, bathroom robe and bathroom towel are equipped at the same time, they will unlock a special ability. Just like the last time Lex received a reward that upgraded his inn, a subtle change swept through his inn. A wave of spirit energy swept across the inn, washing all of his guests in such concentrated and pure spirit energy as they could never have imagined. It was unfortunate that the stronger guests Lex had recently hosted had already left when this happened, or they would get to enjoy untold benefits. Well, all the strong guests except for Remy, the man who wanted the inn to be the official meeting of his secret society. All of Lex's guests, whether they were the arguing family heads, to Marlowe who was butting heads with his wife, to Chen and Blaine who had once experienced this sensation before, immediately stopped what they were doing and sat down to cultivate wherever they were. Since Lex himself could finally sense spirit energy, he too was suddenly overwhelmed by the sensation of having a breakthrough, and had to stop pursuing his notifications to sit and cultivate instead. Those of Lex's workers who could sense spiritual energy also stopped all their tasks to cultivate. The galactic sovereign turtle that had literally just returned from Nibiru was so surprised that even as it sat down and retreated into its shell, it did not know why it was instinctively behaving this way. Little Blue suddenly felt sleepy and decided to nap on top of its father's shell. The gardener, who was cultivating an unusual technique given to him by the turtle instead of the one given by the innkeeper, went into a daze as spirit plants that surrounded him started growing rapidly. Even the few extremely rare seeds Lex had received that had yet to actually sprout, despite the turtle's personal care and attention, vibrated just a little. Then one of them immediately burst open and formed a lotus. Only Mary, a few mortal guests and a few of the AIs who had not yet entered Chi Gathering remained undisturbed during this time, and only they got to see how the inn quickly began to increase in size as well. To be more specific, the inn had doubled in size. It was no longer possible to easily see from one end of the inn to another, unless one climbed the Midnight Mountain. A few hours later, as the first of the guests who had begun cultivating finally stabilized their realms, opened their eyes to a world that seemed more magical than ever. But how could they know that for the Midnight Inn, this was just the beginning? Chapter 188 Exploring Rewards. When Lex finally opened his eyes, he was so shocked he barely understood what was happening. He had only just entered the Chi training realm, and yet a couple of days later he had a spontaneous, repeated breakthrough and entered Chi training level 3. A part of him wanted to believe that Lex was just an unprecedented genius of epic proportions when it came to cultivation, but knew that that was probably not the truth. "Mary, what just happened?" Lex asked as he quickly started to munch on his burritos. He did not expect that raising your cultivation was hungry work, but he was starving. Your inn's star ranking was upgraded. The Midnight Inn is now equivalent to a 2-star ranked planet and is now the ideal destination for higher-leveled cultivators. Every time there is an upgrade in the star ranking, the inn undergoes a qualitative change. The initial burst of spirit energy during that qualitative change is extremely useful to all cultivators, but is not something that can be easily sought out. It is almost impossible to find spiritual energy of that concentration and purity, which is simultaneously very docile in nature. This is why, whenever a cultivator encounters such a wave, their body will naturally absorb it and strengthen their cultivation based on how much they are able to absorb. In fact, if you recall, Bautet and Phallic also left shortly after one of your upgrades. I've always strongly suspected that the surge in spiritual energy is what prompted them to leave, for whatever reason. If you look out to the rest of the inn, you'll notice that there aren't just a few of your guests undergoing a breakthrough. Lex scanned the inn, and he was flabbergasted. Almost all of his guests were sitting on the ground, cross-legged, and were cultivating wherever they happened to be. As amazing as it was also incredibly dangerous. Just the chi training stage was so dangerous it could cause ruptures in the meridians if not done properly, so one can only imagine how much more difficult it was in a higher realm. Yet all of them seemed to be completely fine. In fact, some were more than fine. Lex immediately noticed not only Rorik but also Audrey Morrison breaking through to the nascent realm, along with various other earthlings making great progress in the golden core realms. Lex let out a sigh. As great as it was that these cultivators were growing, Earth was currently too unstable. Their breakthroughs, albeit great for them individually, might destabilize the situation once again. But while the growth of the Earthlings might be problematic down the road, his various AIs that were undergoing a breakthrough were nothing but great assets. In fact, Lex was astonished that any of them had reached the chi training stage at all, but a quick glance let him know that at least a dozen of them had done so. Gerard, Velma, the gardener and Nurse Jubilation were only a few amongst the many who had surprised him like this. And here Lex was feeling great about his own quick breakthrough, but had already been surpassed by his workers. He needed to start paying more attention to them. Lex quickly moved on from that thought, as he had many things to do. He also noticed, during his scan, that the area of the inn had expanded greatly. Furthermore, unlike when he purposefully expanded the edges, this natural growth happened differently. The land literally doubled, which meant the distance between any 2 points was twice what it used to be. For example, the distance from Midnight Manor to Main Street had doubled. This was not necessarily a bad thing, as he felt that these two areas had extremely different vibes, and needed some distance from each other. Yet now, more desperately than before, Lex needed to figure out a way to fill in all that empty space. Landscaping was an option, but even that could only do so much. What Lex needed was a YouTube tutorial on city planning and rural development. And a vineyard. Lex looked at his notification and read through it properly this time. While his reward had been increased for several feats he had accomplished, ultimately raising the reward ranking from SSS Plus to Destiny rank, whatever that meant, Lex noticed that his quest rank had also suffered some demerits. One was because he allowed guests to die during his event, and another because he purposefully targeted zombies, and subsequently devils, which the system did not approve of. Still, his rewards were plentiful. His authority had been raised once again, which came with the usual upgrades he could perform on his various buildings and a few new ones. The size of the inn was also increased. The inn's star ranking had been raised as well, which would definitely serve to attract more guests in the future. He received 1 million MP, which was always nice, who didn't like free money? But after this was when the new and interesting rewards began. He looked at his inventory and saw the SSS rank Protector recruitment token. He summoned the token that was in the usual gold color associated with the inn, but was in the shape of a shield. The token that filled his hand also filled him with a sense of security, and put his mind at ease. Is this why you didn't want me to get security yet? Because you knew I would be getting something like this? Lex asked Mary, who was sitting on his shoulder. Yes, but not exactly. Though it may seem random to you, there is a method to the quest given out by the system, as well as the rewards. Ultimately, the goal is to help you grow the inn. The quests you receive will progressively get harder as you complete them, but still, you manage to perform well over the expected level on this quest. Normally, you would have only received something to help you beef up security, but would require your supervision or control. Ultimately, the security would still depend on how you handle the situation. But this token is much higher ranked and falls into a completely different category of rewards. Similar to the unique opportunity token you use to get the Regal Embrace, when you use this token, the system will scan the entire universe for a suitable protector for the inn who will be completely loyal to the inn. But you still have to be careful when you make your choice. Suitable can mean many things, and you may not end up with what you want if you aren't careful. Lex nodded. It was basically pretty much what Lex himself expected. Even when he was receiving the Regal Embrace, some of the rewards seemed questionable to him. Then he turned his attention to the next reward. Apparently, he had received a Destiny Protection upgrade for the inn, but got no description of what that meant. He could speculate on his own, but his understanding of the universe was too shallow, so he asked Mary once again. What does this Destiny Protection upgrade do? Lex expected to receive either a straightforward answer, or to be told he did not have the authority to know. Mary's answer, however, completely took him by surprise. Chapter 189 Bathroom Set. With a confused look on her face, Mary said, I genuinely have no idea. The only information I received from the inn says, and I quote, while at the inn, one is protected from the influence of destiny. Destiny is a very abstract concept. I guess we'll have to wait till you reach a higher realm or develop your own understanding of destiny to fully understand what this means. Lex frowned. He could guess what destiny meant, but his understanding of destiny was heavily influenced by earthly media and culture. In the context of the universe at large, it may have a different meaning. Either way, since the inn provided protection from the influence of destiny, then he did not need to worry about it. Unless his destiny was actually very positive, then he felt like me may be missing out. But, again, this was based on his understanding of destiny as perceived by those on Earth. The reality may be different. Putting the matter aside, he looked at the newest unlocked feature for the system, special quests. Currently, there were no quests available in that tab, but the description of this feature was very interesting. Special quests were ones that would become available to him from time to time based on special circumstances or during special occasions, and he could choose whether he wanted to accept them or not. Furthermore, the rewards for special quests were not predetermined, and he could actually specify what he wanted. His request may or may not be accepted, but would definitely be considered and influence the final reward. That was it. That was all the information he was given, without any knowledge of what would qualify as a special event or circumstance, and what kind of quests he could expect. So far, all his quests were related to the inn in one way or another, but Lex felt like this might not be the case for special quests. After all, his normal quests could handle those matters. Only time would tell. Then finally came one of the most curious matters, which was his system upgrade, or rather the lack thereof. It had been blocked, for some reason, and his reward had been replaced. There was no information whatsoever about why his upgrade was blocked or what caused it. "Hey Mary, any idea why the system upgrade didn't work?" "What do you mean?" she asked, confused. "The system upgrade I got as a reward. It was blocked, and I got a different reward instead. Any idea why that happened?" Mary looked at him curiously, then seemed to go through some records in her mind. "I'm sorry Lex, but my records don't show any system upgrade other than the Destiny Protection one. The only remaining reward I see is the bathroom robe." Lex frowned as he thought about it. First, the upgrade was blocked, and then, according to Mary, he never received an upgrade in the first place. There was something fishy going on, but like so many other things when it came to the system, Lex could only sit back and wait till he got more information. He turned his attention to the set equipment. He had no idea that his various equipment were a part of sets, and this opened new doors for him. For example, his fancy monocle was already amazing. If it was a part of some set, then he could only imagine what its effects would become once worn together. Lex visualized himself wearing his fancy monocle, a fancy top hat alongside a fancy pocket watch, strolling in some forest, decimating wolves wherever he went. Realistically, he knew the system would never give him something OP, but one could dream. With a smile, he woke up from his daydream and viewed the bathrobe and read its effects. Bathrobe. When worn, the host enters an extremely relaxed state, as if just coming back from a day at the spa, boosting the host's comprehension. The host can use it to comprehend new techniques, understand difficult concepts, make various plans, etc. Lex smiled. As unusual as it was to be wearing a bathrobe while working, he could see this benefiting him greatly while he planned various aspects of the inn. He just had to be sure not to let anyone see him working like that. Then he checked the set ability of wearing the bathroom slippers and bathroom towel at the same time. Bathroom slippers. Entering different areas requires different kinds of preparation. Equip the bathroom slippers while leaving the inn in foreign environments to protect yourself from hazardous environments. Note, the slipper only provides protection from the environment and does not act as a defensive item. Bathroom towel. Bic? What? Don't you hate it when you get something disgusting on yourself? Cleaning up is such a hassle. The bath towel rids the user of any negative statuses that are affecting the user via the skin, i.e. poison, paralysis paste, petrification, tracking powder, bad makeup etc. Can affect foundation realm and below. Bathroom set. When all bathroom accessories are worn together, the host is cleansed completely from both internal and external factors. Internal factors include soul poisoning, artificially induced inner demons, constipation, indigestion, bad breath, etc. External factors include tracking techniques, poisons, curses, body odor, dandruff, wrinkly skin, etc. Note, please collect more items from the bathroom set to enhance the effects of the set. Remarks, since the host is too lazy to shower, the system has provided a solution. Please maintain a high standard of hygiene. Despite being used to the system, and despite ascending to a higher level, giving him complete and total control of his body, Lex could not stop his lip from twitching as he read the remarks. He was an extremely clean person. No one had ever complained to him about body odor. If the system were a person, Lex would kick its behind. Still, the set seemed extremely useful, especially considering there was no restriction on taking it out of the inn. The original butter knife, now known as the fruit knife, despite its amazing ability, could not be taken out of the inn. This would be useful to him when he was out exploring other worlds if he ever got into a precarious situation. Slightly curious, Lex equipped the bathroom set to see how it feels. The robe, warm and soft as it was, released a gentle energy that Lex felt wash over his body and pass through him. It was like being massaged by the hand of 100 angels, and when the energy disappeared, Lex felt extremely refreshed and lighter, both mentally and physically. It took less than a second for him to recall the set also cleansed him in case he was constipated, and now he suddenly felt physically lighter. System, you are a goddamn pervert, Lex said loudly before he removed the robe and moved on to his next task. He could not help but stop to notice that he smelled like lavender. Chapter 190 Protector Token. Putting everything aside, Lex focused on the protector token. There was no use in waiting to use it, as every moment he didn't was a moment he was left without protection. Without any further hesitation, Lex crushed the token. Immediately, a display appeared before him with a few lines of instructions, which read, "Please wait while the system scans for suitable protectors of SSS rank. Please note, you may only select one of the displayed protectors. Please note, to protect the identity of the protectors, their names will not be displayed. Please note, the protector selected will be a real existing entity in the universe, and not a newly created AI. Any loyalty displayed by the protector will be a result of its particular circumstances, as the system will not influence or manipulate the mind of a pre-existing being. Please note that while the protector will be subject to certain restrictions by the system as an employee, should the difference between cultivation realms between the host and protector be too vast, the system will not be able to prevent the protector from betraying the host in case the intention to do so should arise." Lex could not help but chuckle. He should have known things were never so straightforward. Originally, he was looking forward to picking the strongest protector for his inn, but now the situation had taken a dire turn. What should he do? It would depend on his options. Of course, it was more realistic this way as well. How convenient would it be if a Tao Lord directly agreed to be his protector? But at the same time, even with the immense power of the system, how was it possible to restrict someone at that level? Even if not necessarily at the Tao Lord realm, any strong entity that realized that Lex depended on them for security might develop thoughts about gaining Lex's power. Even if they did not know about the system, it would not stop a greedy person from attacking and interrogating Lex. This was why choosing a protector suddenly became a lot more difficult. Finally, the writing on the display changed, and 5 options showed up. Protector A. Cultivation? History, a lone warrior on a mission of vengeance, Protector A was left alone from the tender age of 8 when his family was killed by assassins. Escaping only due to the sacrifice of his siblings, this protector spent his life raising his skill and strength. He was eventually able to defeat his enemies and retook his place as rightful king. Once he became king, he gave rise to the most glorious kingdom in the history of his planet, but even that could not escape from the sands of time. The king's cultivation rose endlessly due to his limitless potential, but only resulted in him having to watch as his new family died, and his once glorious kingdom eventually fell to ruin in the hands of his descendants. Defeated not by any enemy, but from the sorrow of his own heart, he roams the lands, searching for something that will not fade before his eyes, and can accompany him on his endless journey of cultivation. Inviting him to the inn, an entity even beyond his own strength, may invigorate his beat heart and plant the seeds of wanting to protect it in his soul. Protector B. Cultivation, nascent. History. Once a valiant warrior with endless potential, this protector suffered a grave wound that nearly destroyed his cultivation and took his life. With the loss of his talent and potential, he fell into depression and has spent 100 years in bed. If his talent were restored, he could cultivate back to his peak and beyond on his own, and his gratitude would be endless. Protector C. Cultivation, none. History, a protection formation array that gained sentience, but awoke only to discover that the sect it once protected had long since perished. A protection array without anything to protect, the array feels like its existence is pointless. Although unable to move, the array has endless potential and can grow limitlessly as it has a deep understanding of how to grow the strength of its own array endlessly. The only thing it lacks is resources. By inviting it to the inn and providing it a place to protect, you could give its life purpose. Protecteur de. Cultivation, mortal. History, a pup that has just been born a few minutes ago. It has no cultivation, but has a bloodline that will allow it to grow extremely quickly, with the only limits to its potential being the kind of resources it can absorb. It was put to sleep the instant it was born, and so its personality is unknown, but could easily be trained. Protectore. Pan, daene acero, v, el cultivasten? History: the sun and the moon are her food, and her very existence defies fate. Her glory is boundless and her supremacy is without question. She was trapped by her father on a planet in a dead zone known as Earth, where she protected a village of humans who worshipped her for thousands of years, but eventually escaped due to her own ingenuity. Now free, the protector sought to roam the universe freely, but her escape alerted her father quicker than anticipated. This goddess of pleasure and prosperity is searching for a place where she may hide from her father, without losing her freedom. If allowed to hide in the inn, she will be extremely grateful. Probably. As long as she is worshipped properly. Lex read through all the descriptions and had several thoughts. The first of them being, in the entire universe, were these the only qualified protectors? When he asked Mary, she gave him an answer he should have expected. No, these are not the only ones available, but the limit you have on options is only 5. It's similar to when you only received 5 options for your previous rewards from which you picked Regal Embrace. So, when the system discovers any 5 that fall into the qualification category, it stops the search and presents you with the information. So these aren't the only ones in the universe, but the first 5 the system encountered. Since you have raised your authority sufficiently, I can tell you that in the future, once your authority rises even more, you can enter the search parameters for such rewards on your own. Of course, the premise for that is to once again receive an award at this level. I'm going to be honest, I never expected you to receive such an award even once, let alone twice, and it'll only get harder in the future. Lazy system. Okay, now that I understand that much, look at Protectory and tell me that isn't Batet. That's definitely her, right? Mary read the description and, based on what she knew, it did seem like it. But how was that possible? This was too much of a coincidence, right? One may think it made sense, as she was probably somewhere close to Earth, and any scan performed by the system would find her first, but the system did not work that way. The concept of space was vastly different from how mortals or lower-leveled cultivators perceived it. The only thing she could chalk this up to was fate. Anyway, it doesn't matter if she is or isn't. She's not amongst the ones I was considering. Lex's considerations were Protector C, the formation, and D, the pup. They both came with their pros and cons. First, the formation. Since its primary purpose was defense and protection, using it to protect the inn was perfect. Furthermore, as the formation was sentient, it could help guide Lex in letting him know how to strengthen and grow the formation. But for all the good it brought him, the sentience also presented him with a problem. Since the system could not guarantee loyalty, Lex felt hesitant about hiring it. He did not know what kind of personality the formation would have, and how effectively his orders would be. Lex was extremely vulnerable right now, and had to make a decision before any incidents could take place. After all, his inn had garnered a lot more attention now, and from various groups of people. Lex was confident that he could continue to put on a performance so that the array would never realize how weak and dependent on it Lex truly was. Yet at the same time, a single slip-up was all it would take to reveal that Lex was relying on the formation for protection. Of course, none of this truly even mattered if a random security incident ended up killing Lex while he was busy pretending to be strong in the first place. If he showed any kind of weakness, well, Lex did not need to imagine what would happen to him. It was too dreadful. Then he turned his attention to the pup. The system said it could grow quickly, depending on the kind of resources it was fed. Resources, with a bit of imagination on Lex's part, could easily be arranged. He rubbed his hands together like an evil villain in a movie. Chapter 191 Fenrir. Tuning into the piano music being played at the Midnight Manor, Lex slowly rubbed his fingers together as he listed down the pros and cons of Protector D, the pup. The pro was obvious. Since it was a newborn pup, Lex could train it from birth, which would mean that loyalty was not an issue. After all, dogs were extremely loyal. But the con was also fairly obvious. The whole point of having a protector in the first place was to provide security, but if the protector was even weaker than Lex, then its position would be pointless. While it had limitless potential, and could benefit Lex far in the future, it would not help Lex from any troubles today or tomorrow. Basically, Lex's issue was boiled down to only 2 factors. He could choose immediate strength and questionable loyalty, or eventual strength but assured loyalty. It was, surprisingly difficult to choose. But tomorrow, or the days that followed, wouldn't matter if he could not live past today. He had to deal with his immediate protection first. Lex opened up his system and investigated what kind of protection he could purchase directly from the system, as this should help him decide. Fortunately, because of his increase in authority, he had more options available to him. One of the options, though very expensive, immediately caught Lex's eye. While this would not provide an immediate solution, it was still very quick. He scanned his inn and found the sovereign galactic turtle sleeping in its shell near the greenhouse. A quick scan showed him that the turtle did not have a breakthrough to a higher realm, and had only increased its cultivation level within the golden core realm. This was good news, as Lex would not have been able to wake it up otherwise, since a breakthrough like that would put it into a very deep slumber. Teleporting directly to the turtle, Lex directly woke it up by knocking on its shell like a guest, knocking on a door. After a few tries, the sleepy turtle eventually brought out its head to investigate what was going on. "Hey turtle, if I raise the effectiveness of the greenhouse and give you a cutting of a delinquent viper vine, how quickly can you raise it to maturity?" The turtle was confused by the question, mostly because it did not know the name of most of the plants he worked with. Lex showed him a picture and, after considering for a while, gave an answer Lex found acceptable. With a heavy heart, Lex spent 5 million MP, leaving him with only 4,780,000 MP, and purchased a cutting of a delinquent viper vine. He then spent another 100,000 MP upgrading the greenhouse to the maximum amount his authority would allow. With both of those tasks done, Lex handed the cutting to the turtle and said, "This is your immediate priority for now, and everything else can be taken care of later. Plant this in the greenhouse and grow it as quickly as you can. I'm counting on you." With that, Lex disappeared back to his room, as he had a decision to make. The turtle let out a tired sigh and slowly stood up, completely unaware that Little Blue was sleeping on its shell. Just like that, the gardener woke up to the unusual sight of the baby whale sleeping on a giant turtle that was walking across the greenhouse. Then he noticed all the overgrown plants and cried out, "My art." He quickly took out a pair of shears and began trimming them where he could, to try to reclaim what had been lost of his artwork. The gardener had been trying so hard to create his own art using the plants. If taken care of properly, when they grew up according to his desires, they would become a display worthy of the inn. But somehow, something always got in the way. The gardener kept cutting with tears running down his face, unaware that wherever he tears would drop, new plants would start to grow and ruin his artwork. Back in his room, Lex did not delay any further and selected his protector before he ended up changing his mind. A blindingly bright light flashed in front of his eyes, and when it disappeared, it left him with a pup before his eyes. A white and black dog, one that Lex assumed was a husky, lay before Lex, sleeping soundly. The reason Lex assumed, and was not sure that it was a husky, was because the pup was as big as a grown horse. Even as a mortal, he was afraid of what would happen if this dog tried to give him a hug or tackled him with love. Who the heck would train this massive puppy about where to relieve itself? He felt a headache coming on, but regardless of what happened, his choice was made. He could not allow a being that was much stronger than him to stay in the inn permanently. Regardless of how loyal it might be at the start, there was no guarantee that with time, it would not have a change of heart. With this puppy, though, Lex could train it well, and provide it with the best resources to help it grow. Best of all, the turtle would help him grow the delinquent viper vine. Although it was very expensive, at full maturity it could grow up to one level above the nascent realm. Furthermore, it normally lived underground and could cover an area of up to 20,000 acres. The best part was, this vine could be controlled directly by Lex via the system. He could even pass the control over to Mary. Over time, according to the system's information, he could nurture the vine's spirit so that when it formed, it was completely loyal to Lex. Of course, it would not immediately reach that realm, but the turtle promised to speed it up as much as possible. Until then, Lex would have to get by with using the fruit knife. This was a dangerous move for Lex, but he was betting on the fact that there would be a short lull in terms of guests after the games. This got in the way of some of Lex's plans, but it wasn't a big deal to spend some time at the inn and just concentrate on improving it in the meantime. Anyway, now Lex turned his attention to something very, very important. He had to name the puppy. Somewhere deep inside, he felt a calling to inherit his place as an MC and name the dog Little White, but could not find it in himself to name the dog so casually. He scanned the pup once to learn more about it first. Name, none. Age, 0. Sex, male. Cultivation details, mortal. Species, dog. Enova, el midnight in prestige level, jedna. Bloodline, Fenrir 100% purity. Condition, the dog has been injected with a powerful sleeping and priming agent, making it susceptible to bloodline theft. If left alone, it should recover on its own in a day. Remarks, you have probably made a powerful enemy somewhere in the universe by stealing this dog. LOL, get wrecked. Of course, Lex made an enemy somewhere in the universe, but he couldn't care less. How would that person ever track Lex down? Lex rubbed his hand over the massive pup's head and looked at it fondly. He had no idea what a 100% purity Fenrir bloodline meant, but he liked the sound of it. Henceforth, he would be called Fenrir. As is the way with these things, far away somewhere in the universe, a massive wolf stared at an empty cage with red eyes. It took it 1 million years to finally breed a purebred Fenrir, the source for the final ingredient to evolve its own superior Lycaeo's bloodline. Yet, as he was preparing for the extraction ceremony, the pup disappeared from right in front of its eyes. How was it possible for the pup to disappear before his very eyes, in his own private domain? The wolf searched its domain for the intruder using its senses, but it was no use. The most frustrating part was that while giving birth to the pup, its mother, which had long been the subject of its various experiments, finally died. Originally, the wolf did not care, but now he was left without a mature breeder. The wolf turned its eyes to another cage which held a similarly sleeping dog, the original pup's sister. At least he did not need to start from scratch this time. A 99% purity whelp like this would greatly increase his chance to breed a 100% one again. It needed to raise this new breeder to maturity, which would no doubt take a while, but at least it didn't start from scratch. More importantly, it needed to figure out how the original pup disappeared, and how to prevent any future pups from disappearing. It would never repeat its mistake again. Chapter 192 Fanatics. While Fenrir was currently sleeping in Lex's room, he wanted to create a real home for it. He looked at its thick coat and immediately knew where it should live. Since it was a newborn, Lex would not be leaving it alone for now, but in the future, its home would be near the peak of Midnight Mountain. Lex made a few quick alterations and a small, yet hidden cave appeared near the peak of the mountain. He left the cave empty for now, as he planned on designing it based on Fenrir's personality, but carved the pup's name into the wall. He wanted to ensure that the cave would not easily be located by his guests, so he also moved all the trails coming even close to this location. But as much as Lex wanted the pup to live in its own home, it was likely that it would be living with Lex for a while, so he needed to rearrange his own apartment. Of course, Lex could have some of the AI take care of the pup, but since he was nurturing it to be absolutely loyal to Lex himself, he would have to spend a considerable amount of time with it. There were no shortcuts in this regard. Lex purchased a massive doggy bed and placed it near his own, and then bought a collection of chew toys. Lex added a new room to his apartment which would be keeping all the dog's things temporarily. Something this big would definitely consume a lot of space. He also wished he had some kind of guide or manual about this breed of dogs, and even checked the system for something like that, but had no luck finding anything of the sort. He would need to keep an eye out for an expert on beasts so he could ask him some questions, such as, what was he supposed to feed the dog? Was a dog like this still allergic to chocolate? Because, to be honest, Lex had a lot of chocolate in his apartment. His excuse was that he left some on his guests' pillows to improve their experience, but he had been munching on it every chance he got. But for now, he had done everything he could regarding the dog. With the rewards finally handled and the event finally over, Lex could now turn his attention to a matter he had been putting off, which was meeting Remy Laverne and learning more about this secret society. Personally, he didn't think it was such a big deal, even as far as prompting the system to give him a quest regarding it. Without delaying the matter any longer, Lex teleported from his room to the lake where the young man seemed to be reading a book by the water. Surprisingly, the book was in Japanese. It must have been given to him by Akihiko. The two seemed to have become decent friends over the course of the games. I see you seem to be getting along with Akihiko, Lex said, as he came up and sat beside Remy. Yes, Akihiko-san is surprisingly wise for someone so young. I have learnt much from him. Suddenly Lex realized that this man who looked very young might actually be very old, but maintained his appearance due to cultivation. On the other hand, despite his vigor and good health, Akihiko was a human mortal in his 50s, and so naturally looked like an old man. Judging people by their appearance, despite the old adage not to do so, was a habit that Lex would have to overcome. Lex scanned him, to learn a little more about this man who prompted a quest. Name, Remy Laverne. Age, 9,999. Sex, male. Cultivation details? Species, Adelomorpher. Midnight and prestige level, 1. Remarks, very literally the slippers on his feet are worth more than you, so scam him like a call center based out of a basement. Ah, yet another old geezer in disguise. But what in the world was an Adelomorpher? He looked human, and if he were hiding or altering his appearance, the host attire would have detected it. Mortality and short age bring a perspective to time many cultivators lack, Lex replied to Remy's comment about Akihiko's wisdom. I am curious though, what would someone like him have to teach someone like you? Your lives must be extremely different from one another. That's also what I thought, at first at least. But the details can vary, pursuits can vary, even desires can vary, but the pattern remains the same. He took the experiences of his short life and superimposed them upon mine. The lessons he learnt in a year, I could not even learn in 1,000. He must be a wise man, then. It is a tragedy that the line between wisdom and idiocy is so thin. No matter what I say, Akihiko-san refuses to cultivate. Why would anyone willingly forsake a better and longer life? Everyone has a story, he must have his reasons. I am more interested in hearing about you, though. I hope you've been enjoying your stay. Heh, I just had the easiest breakthrough of my entire life and saved thousands of years of work, so how could I be anything but great? Remy asked with a massive grin on his face. At first, I was only considering this place because of the ease of teleportation, not to mention the phenomenal entertainment, but after that breakthrough, I'm convinced. Our base can be in nowhere other than here. That's not to mention at all, what place could be safer than here? I saw with my own eyes how that young chap Ragnar stayed in line. If even someone like him behaved, what else do I have to worry about? Are you so sure? Lex asked, amused. I have no problem with it, so long as all your members follow the rules, but this is a public place and I have many guests. It is not really a good idea to have this as a base for a secret society. That's not to mention at all the very fact that you and I are having this discussion. Shouldn't you be hiding the fact that you want to host your society here instead of blatantly telling me? I doubt I could keep secrets from you, Remy said very casually, and I'm sure if we had any secret meetings here, you'd eventually find out. The point is not to keep the secret from you, but to get your help keeping the secret from everyone else. Besides, isn't this being a public place the perfect disguise? Even if our members come often, with such a diverse clientele, no one will pay extra attention to us. Lex raised his eyebrow. What Remy said did make sense, in a way. Lex felt like he was insisting on using video game logic, but since he was fulfilling a quest, who was he to stop him? So then, what would you like to do? I doubt simply renting a room for a meeting is all you had in mind. If only things were so simple. You see, the first step in hosting the society would be distributing the golden keys to the few members of my organization. The problem is, some of them are in other galaxies and I do not have the time to spare to travel for so long just to distribute keys, as I have a job. So, while I've already had keys sent to the ones within my reach, if possible, the first thing I would like you to do is distribute the keys. This request by Remy was extremely reasonable, based on the premise that Lex could teleport people across the universe. Unfortunately, he could not actually freely teleport wherever he chose, and totally depended on the location of the planets connected to his system. Mary, is there any way I can control what planets the inn connects to? Well, your authority has increased significantly from when you started. If you get some item from the planet, it might be possible to target it specifically. It would still depend on how far it is, though, from the regions the inn normally starts searching from. How can I find these people? Lex asked, to which Remy scratched his head. Would their names and descriptions work? Lex only stared back at Remy as if he were an idiot. Let alone the whole universe, there were billions of people on any given planet, many of whom would share a name. How were those two details good enough in any capacity? Even if Lex were really as powerful as everyone believed, that was still too much, right? Some kind of personal item will suffice, Lex said, finally. Yeah, I guess that's fair. I'll see if I can get my hands on anything like that. I guess sending them the keys will have to wait. Now, on to my second request. The thing is, the purpose of our society is very specific, and we require a certain kind of environment to carry out our activities, so. As Remy began outlining what he needed, Lex started to get worried. Was he about to host a society of BDSM fanatics? Chapter 193 Employees. In a relatively remote corner of the inn, far away from any of the main attractions, Lex built a cabin. The cabin itself wasn't too large, with 3 individual bedrooms and 1 living room that also had a kitchen in it. If anything, the unique part of this cabin was the secret basement. The entrance to the basement was completely hidden and could not be detected, as arranged by Lex, by using his powers, so that if Remy ever needed to bring someone else into the cabin, they would never detect the opening. A vertical ladder from the opening led into the first room of the basement was just one that led to 4 other rooms. This is where the real magic of the inn shone, as building the specifications of those rooms would require extensive engineering and labor, along with expensive and rare materials. Yet Lex was easily able to isolate the unique environments in each room. The first room was completely empty except for a small pool of lava right in the middle. The second room was completely empty, except that it was -100 degrees Celsius and perfectly insulated. The third room had dirt instead of concrete as the floor, with perfect artificial lighting and humidity to act as a greenhouse. The fourth room was completely normal and completely empty. Lex could not even begin to imagine what he needed such unusual rooms for, especially so close together, but he did not ask. At most, he would just spy on them whenever they actually used the room, which Remy was quite upfront about in saying that he did not expect to be able to keep secrets from Lex. He did add, though, that they themselves weren't completely certain about what kind of requirements they needed, but would make the corresponding changes themselves after some experimentation. The only thing Lex said was that Remy wasn't allowed to hold people against their will, or harm them in any way, in the inn, to which Remy agreed. Oddly enough, the quest wasn't completed yet, but Lex didn't know what more he could do, so he just ignored it for now. Due to the uniqueness of the cabin, Lex charged Remy 400 MP per night for it, and Remy booked it directly for 300 days, the maximum amount he was allowed to rent out a place at a time, as Lex learnt. Well, earning 120,000 MP so easily wasn't something Lex would fret over. Once he was done inspecting the cabin, Remy was extremely satisfied, and finally left the inn to continue his job, the details of which he very openly shared with Lex. On a side note, Lex did not think Remy was a good person to hire to conduct secretive jobs, as Remy was actually sent by the Jotun Empire to compile an independent report on the inn. Apparently, according to Ragnar's report, they suspected Lex to be at the Dao Lord realm or above, and it was Remy's job to evaluate the legitimacy of such a claim. Remy even offered to show Lex the report, which he politely declined. Once this eccentric guest finally left, Lex finally had some free time. There were, of course, many things he needed to do, but none so urgent that they required his immediate attention, which is why he could take his time and choose what he wanted. Teleporting away from the cabin, he reappeared at the manor where Velma was currently passing out orders to some of the other AIs. As soon as she was done, she quickly came to him and asked, "Is there anything you need, Innkeeper? I just came to check up on you. How are you doing? Is there anything that you need?" "I'm doing well," Velma replied, suddenly getting flustered. She felt incredibly flattered that the innkeeper was checking up on her. It is a little difficult to manage all the guests at the manor as well as at Avalon at the same time. Maybe you should put someone else in charge of the Avalon. That makes sense. Take some time to evaluate everyone working there and give me a suggestion about who would be good for that position. Any other suggestions? Is there anything you want? No, I am extremely satisfied with the way things are. How's your cultivation going? I see you've already entered the chi training stage. Oh, it's excellent, she said as she suddenly jumped with excitement. Cultivating was really easy, and I broke through the chi training stage even before Gerard. I even unlocked a bloodline ability, look. As she said that, a silver light shone in her eyes, before more silver light appeared in her hand, taking the shape of a washcloth. Using this, I can wipe the whole manor in minutes, she said, as she displayed her prowess by having the washcloth fly around at astonishing speeds, wiping down each and every surface. That's amazing, Lex said genuinely, not realizing his AIs could even exhibit bloodline powers. He scanned Velma to learn more about her. Name, Velma. Age, 0. Sex, female. Cultivation details, chi training. Species, human, artificially created. Midnight indesignation, midnight manur supervisor. Bloodline, regalia bloom. Remarks, just so you know, this qualifies as child labor. Hey Mary, Lex asked, with a hint of hesitation in his voice. Does Velma have a soul? Yes, she answered immediately. As a living being, of course, she has a soul. Suddenly, Lex was filled with guilt. He had literally been treating them like AI, because of his assumption that they were artificial beings, but, although different in the way they were born, they were still human. Lex suppressed his guilt and immediately made a decision. Instead of AI, Velma and the rest would be referred to as his employees or workers. He would not demean them like that now that he was in the know. Velma, I plan to start paying all the workers a salary. Since I'm already taking care of your housing and food, how about 100 MP a week sound? Oh no, she said in a panic, her silver washcloth disappearing. We do not need salaries. You have already given us enough. Nonsense, since you are working, of course you must be paid. At the inn, everyone is like family. And not only salaries, we need to work out everyone's schedule so we can figure out how we plan on giving holidays and vacations. We can't have everyone working every day. This conversation ended up taking much longer than Lex anticipated, but eventually Velma reluctantly agreed and told him she would help him plan out the schedules. Lex also wanted to have a casual, non-work-related conversation with her, but he felt like he should take it slow. This little girl, or baby? This loyal employee of his was way too excitable. Chapter 194 You Have Booty. A week went by since Lex's conversation with Velma. It was oddly peaceful and the least hectic week Lex had in a while, which allowed him to spend the time very productively. He finalized the employees' pay at 100 MP a week. Counting employees that worked at the Avalon and Manor, as well as the various miscellaneous jobs across the inn, he had roughly 150 workers. He was momentarily mind-blown when he realized how many people he had working for them. He deducted 360,000 MP from his total and set the system to pay the employees on a weekly basis. He took this time to meet more of his employees and learn about them as well. Learning that Gerard, the employee with the appearance and personality of an old man, had developed a craze for driving and racing, Lex was extremely surprised. He was surprised even more when he learned how much game the old man had. Out of all his employees, Gerard worked the most, because there was always a line of older ladies wanting to be driven around by him. And sometimes, some young ladies as well. Of course, all he ever did was to drive them around and chat with them. Lex offered to buy him an actual car, but he insisted on keeping his golf cart, and just requested a few upgrades, only some of which Lex was able to facilitate him with. Despite the system's seeming ability to make absolutely anything, it actually had very strict limitations. For the rest of his requested upgrades, Lex would need to find a mechanic. He put that on the mystery trial list as well. Lex also finally installed the lazy river close to the lake. He scrapped his original plan to have it extend across the inn as a way of transport, and kept it to a corner of the inn. Still, it was widely appreciated by his guests. He also built a few glasshouses underwater. His primary target for those were beasts or guests that could only exist in water, but a few special functions would allow humans to live there as well. The water could be added or removed from the houses as needed, and the glass could go from clear to opaque, as per the guest requirements. That was also a huge hit among his guests. He added a few tree houses in the forest as well, and inspired by the hobbits, built a few houses that seemed to meld into the landscaped hills. Overall, he increased his guest capacity by now having a total of 400 rooms overall, many of which were empty. He needed empty rooms, otherwise the random golden door would not spawn on the planets. Speaking of planets, Lex spent 250,000 MP, 300,000 MP and 500,000 MP to extend the reach of the inn from just Earth, Vegas Minima and Nibiru to their entire star systems respectively. This meant the inn was connected to not only all the planets in their systems, but moons, satellites and spaceships in that area as well. Not only did this spread the range for where the Golden Door would appear to accept new guests, Lex could directly teleport to any planet in those systems that he wanted. The Vegas system only had 2 other habitable planets, as Lex remembered, but apparently Nibiru had 7 other planets and hundreds of moons in its system that were inhabited, which is why it was the most expensive of the 3 systems. Of course, Lex did not plan on visiting those planets, not yet anyway, but it was good to spread the reach of the inn. During this time, the delinquent viper vine, DVV, had already started to grow. Though planted in the greenhouse, it could extend its vine up to 1 acre away from its location right now. Its strength was still very low, at only the chi training stage equivalent, but the turtle assured him that within a month it could get it to the base of the Golden Core realm. When speaking of the vine, it was natural to also think of the pup that caused Lex to purchase it in the first place. As promised by the system, Fenrir had woken up a day later. Yet it did not have the energy Lex was expecting from a massive newborn pup. It seemed to be extremely depressed. The good news was that it acknowledged Lex easily, and grew extremely attached to him. The bad news was, Fenrir was a cuddler. Lex had been sleeping with the pup for the past week. Today, Lex finally managed to get the depressed pup and the shy baby whale to spend some time together. After acknowledging each other, the respective babies quickly returned to their fathers after having drained their social batteries. As for what Lex fed the pup, a lot of thought had gone into it. Lex fed him a lot of spiritual food, along with 1 tier 1 zombie core, as well as a lot of meat every day. The pup ate till it was full, and already its strength had shown rapid growth. In fact, Lex felt no shame whatsoever, so he rode the pup around his inn like a horse. Like Little Blue, Fenrir was an immediate hit with all the Earthlings, but since he was always with Lex, they could only admire him from afar. Yes, as far as Lex was concerned, this past 1 week was extremely enjoyable. But today, finally, he welcomed a few guests that could spell potential trouble if not handled correctly, which is why he already had the fruit knife hidden within his sleeve. A small group of pirates had returned to the inn, this time sober. They were led by an almost frail-looking man, but one that wore the look of authority on his face. None of them were subtle as they looked around the place, as one group searched for the guards that took care of them the last time they were here, while another admired the scenery they saw for the first time. "Welcome guests, to the Midnight Inn," Lex said, his usual smile on his face. The pirates had already been informed about the inn and its rules by their personal holographic assistants, but Lex liked to welcome them nonetheless. The leader, maintaining his stern expression, looked at Lex dead in the eyes as he said, "I was told you have booty." Chapter 195 Captain Hooker. "I was told you have booty," the leader said, his expression deadly serious. Lex, on the other hand, almost broke character. "Excuse me," he said, unsure of how exactly to respond to that statement. Before the man could repeat himself, though, a golf cart approached them with a relatively short and bulky man hanging out the side. "Captain, you're finally here," the man yelled with a massive grin. Looking at the telling man, the leader's expression softened a bit, and he simply waited for him to catch up with them. Booty, why the hell did you not return to the ship? The leader asked when Booty approached. Haha, Captain, smell the fresh air. Who would want to return to that tin can and breathe in recycled air when you can spend time here, relaxing? The captain did not respond, and only glared at Booty. Alright, it's because I knew there was no other way to get you to visit this place yourself. It's incredible. I've spent some time here, and look, I even had a breakthrough. Booty then displayed his mid-golden core aura to his fellow pirates with pride. And, most importantly, we can even unload stuff here. Captain, you have to check out the guild room, it's so much more convenient than that shop on Benaruf, and we can just teleport here whenever we want. This is a great place. Booty was in a great mood, and the rest of the crew was indeed surprised by his sudden breakthrough. The captain, though, did not seem pleased. He was a firm believer in if things were too good to be true, they usually weren't. Lex, who had only been observing so far, chimed in, well, it seems you have found your companion. Feel free to take a tour of the place on your own, or if you need any help, don't hesitate to ask. The Midnight Inn welcomes everyone, as long as they follow rules. With that said, Lex disappeared, not giving them any time to respond. But though he had disappeared, his attention was still focused on the pirates. If they made any trouble, Lex would need to solve it immediately. The good news was, most of these pirates were in the Foundation realm, and could easily be resolved using the fruit knife if they made trouble. The bad news was, the captain wasn't. Lex scanned the space pirate captain. Name, Captain Hooker. Age, 86. Sex, male. Cultivation details, nascent initial. Species, human. Midnight and prestige level, 1. Bloodline, orc. Condition, the body is in a state of starvation. Remarks, space pirates are either very rich or very poor. They look poor. Firstly, he was surprised by the realms of these space pirates. He expected pirates to be stronger, though it was a good thing they weren't. What Lex didn't know was, space pirates could get away with being weaker, because as long as they destroyed or disabled an enemy ship, their raid was practically complete. Space fighting was extremely dangerous, as well as difficult. A good enough spaceship was 1,000,000 times better than having stronger pirates by your side. Of course, this was dependent on what kind of enemies you targeted, but it was true for the majority. While Booty was convincing the captain to explore the inn, and Lex was listening in, Mary appeared to tell him that Marlowe was requesting to speak with him. Lex raised his eyebrow in curiosity, but complied. Lex teleported to the lakeside, the most popular spot in his inn at the moment, and greeted Marlowe, who was busy eating endlessly. It has been a while, King Marlowe, Lex said with schadenfreude in his voice. Marlowe instantly burst into a fit of laughter, which forced him to finally stop eating. It is just a title, it doesn't matter much, Marlowe said in false humility as the massive grin on his face told Lex. But I have been good nonetheless. I had an important question I wanted to ask you about something very serious. Go ahead. Before the midnight game started, you said there was a combat arena that had been temporarily shut down. Can I use it now? I'm itching to have a go with that old geezer Brandon. Of course, fighting is what this maniac wanted to do. Sure, I'll open the arena. But I hope you know when to stop on your own. Yes, of course. It'll just be a friendly spar. I hope so, Lex said internally, because if it wasn't a friendly spar he would have no way to intervene. But the timing also wasn't bad. If he could have them fight where the pirates could see, it would intimidate them enough to not cause trouble. Lex thought about where to place the arena, and then decided near the recovery room was a good idea. A few hundred feet away from the recovery room, Lex built an open-air arena around 5,000 square feet in size. He reinforced the ground a few times so it wouldn't break, and then purchased a small array to cover the arena to stop their attacks from exiting. Even then, such a small array with a defensive purpose cost him 100,000 MP. On the topic of arrays, one might wonder why Lex never purchased a defense array for the inn if he was so concerned about security. The truth was, of the security options available to him, arrays were one of the options. But to cover the space of the entire inn would cost a few billion MP. That, too, was only a defensive array. To stop the assailants from attacking further, or to control them, would cost several times more. So, for now, this would have to do. He built a few seating stands for anyone who wanted to view the match, as well as a broadcasting upgrade for 10,000 MP. This would broadcast any matches in the inn like what happened during the games, so that if anyone wanted to watch from the comfort of their room, they could. It's done, he transmitted to Marlowe, and sent him the location. Chapter 196 Supreme Emperor. News of the newly crowned King of New York, Marlowe, challenging the newly declared Supreme Emperor of Mars, Brandon, spread fast. Mostly because Marlowe roared his challenge at Brandon as loud as he could without causing something to break. Supreme Emperor Brandon was once again celebrating his honeymoon with the Supreme Empress Audrey, and so was in no mood to respond immediately. This gave enough time for news to spread across the inn. Rorik, the acting ruler of Mars, as the title his parents had imparted upon him, was currently not at the inn, or else he may have tried to downplay this fight. But he had been gone for nearly a week, as the heir apparent, that would be the title Brandon gave to Alexander, had briefly returned to Earth since no one was supposed to know his location on Earth, and had returned with grave news. Alexander's friend, Zeus, had managed to send him some extremely vital news at the risk of his own life. He had transmitted the identity of the traitor in the Morrison family, as well as some aspects of the Council's plan to take over Mars as well. Though the news transmitted did not contain too many details, there was enough for them to ascertain that the plan was extremely thorough. Apparently, the Council had tampered with all the atmospheric regulation formations on the planet, not to mention any other plans they may have. Originally, this may have presented a problem for the Morrisons, as they were weak and exposed during transit from Earth to Mars, but with 3 nascents in the family, now they could literally just destroy the Council. Thus Rorik was currently on Earth, handling the situation as he saw fit, as Brandon had given him permission to do whatever he wanted. The family heads had also used this opportunity to return to Earth and test if their newfound strength could overcome the arrays trapping them. Usually this was the kind of stuff Lex would worry about, since it might affect stability on Earth, but through spying on his guests Lex already knew that Fernanda, who was under a lot of pressure, had told the Council that she would interfere if the situation deteriorated. All in all, the situation was so complex on Earth that Lex simply stopped following it. Should the situation get bad, he would return to rescue his family, otherwise he would just not care. A result of this unusual situation caused a massive crowd to gather at the newly built arena. The environment was different from the Colosseum, but that was a nice change as well. Marlowe, of course, had arrived on stage. Behind him was his own group of supporters, including his mother and Larry. Sophia, predictably, had not deigned this important enough to leave her son's side and watched via hologram. Brandon had his own group of supporters, despite his current absence. Even the pirates happened to find their way to the arena and had in no way been manipulated by Lex having his staff give them the wrong directions. The crowd especially got excited when the innkeeper himself showed up and sat beside him. Lex was extremely friendly and charismatic, and in no way let anyone know that the only reason he was here was because the fruit knife was currently the only deterrent he had. In fact, Lex had even tried to upgrade the fruit knife into the fabled chef's knife, but unfortunately he lacked the key ingredient, 50 Millennium Crystal Watermelon. Only by slicing open this apparently legendary and rare fruit could the fruit knife be upgraded. Eventually, Brandon finally appeared holding hands with his wife. He was wearing shorts and a white undershirt, showing off his various tattoos. Audrey, who now looked even younger than she had before, was wearing a long skirt and a random t-shirt. The two really did look like a couple of youngsters. In fact, if Lex stood beside Brandon, it would be tough to decide who was older. "Brat, you better be ready to get your behind whopped. Don't you know not to disturb your elders?" "Shut up, you old, irresponsible geezer, I've been wanting to beat you up from the moment I heard about how you raised Alexander. That's no way to raise a child. He's my grandchild, I can do what I want." "Oh yeah, well, this is my leg and I can kick whoever I want with it." The duo's pre-match trash talk was truly unique. "Before you two begin," Lex interrupted, "I would just like to remind you not to push things too far. If I need to get involved, things will not end well." "Things will not end well for me," Lex silently completed his sentence. They acknowledged the innkeeper before Brandon stepped into the ring. The crowd hushed, and even the pirates stopped their chatter to pay attention. This was the first time Lex would see a fight between 2 nascent-level cultivators, so naturally all his attention was on stage. The fight began and reached peak intensity immediately, without any warm-up. With eyes wide open and bated breaths, everyone watched 2 old men fight each other. During all the hubbub, though, Lex missed the fact that 2 new guests entered the inn. One of them was Horace, the overly dramatic teenager who was in love with Aisha. It just so happened that another guest appeared at the same time, a guest who was slightly older than Horace. Lex would have recognized this second guest as Bobber, the celebrity he read about on Tempest from the ancient Mogul family. The 2 guests who should not have had anything to do with each other locked eyes the moment they appeared, and then displayed animosity-filled grimaces. "I thought you died," Horace finally spat through gritted teeth. "I heard you got scammed by some girl on Tempest and beaten to death. And I heard your family made you dump your girlfriend. Must be nice, out there in the universe, being spoiled and pampered like some rich heir." Horace immediately drew a sword and stared at Bobber with eyes that screamed murder. Chapter 197 Ventura. While the standoff between Brandon and Marlowe was one worthy of being contested, between these 2 kids, there was no point in fighting. Bobber was a chi training cultivator and Horace had only just entered the body-tempering realm. But the passion of youth did not seek logic, and currently Horace was ready to kill. That is, until Alexander, who was passing by, saw them. He did not recognize them, but the situation was obvious to read. "I advise you not to fight here," he said in passing, not paying too much attention to them. "Not only will it be pointless, you'll get banned from coming to the inn. If you're really desperate for a fight, go to the battle arena." Despite his anger, Horace controlled himself and sheathed his sword. Bobber, on the other hand, was startled when he saw Alexander. Even before Brandon proclaimed his own family royalty out of jealousy for the attention Marlowe was getting, Alexander was considered a prince on Earth. He was strongly admired by his own generation and those near him in age, and Bobber was no exception. Though technically Bobber could also be considered a prince due to his ancient heritage, he did not behave arrogantly in front of the real deal. His attitude became even more docile when he thought of the reason he even came to this inn. "Excuse me for the crass display, Your Grace," Bobber said promptly, completely ignoring Horace. "Don't worry about it," Alexander said. "Your Grace, would it be possible to talk for a moment?" Bobber said, quickly catching up to Alexander who was already leaving. "I have a message for you from Russian Princess 77. Bobber almost blushed as he said the name. Not only had he been beaten up badly by a prank she pulled, but later, through a series of coincidences, he ended up working for her. Alexander paused and turned to look at Bobber. Russian Princess 77 had been a great help to him many times, and he took her very seriously, but at the same time, he still knew next to nothing about her. This might be a good opportunity to resolve that issue. Alexander eyed Horace, who was standing nearby, and said, "Follow me." After walking a short distance, he asked, "What's the message?" Russian Princess 77 said that she has some information that will greatly influence your future. If you want to hear it, then you have to agree to owe her a favor. Alexander thought about this for a moment, but then eventually nodded and said, "All right, I'll owe her." "What's the information?" "She said it's very important that you enter the new minor realm that will open on Earth as early as possible, the one gifted by the inn. She says that if you miss this, you'll lose someone very important in your life without any way of getting them back." Alexander frowned as he ruminated on her exact words. The phrasing mattered immensely. Still, he had some time to think this over before the realm opened. For now, he looked back at Bobber and smiled. "So you're her friend?" he asked, as he thought of ways to extract information about her. If Lex did not have the power of the host attire, he would never be able to keep up with this fight. He was expecting to see some new forms of fighting, but the direction this fight had taken was very surprising. Marlowe, in his new form of cultivation, had lost access to spiritual energy as well as spiritual techniques, but instead gained various bloodline abilities. Brandon, on the other hand, was practically the poster child for conventional cultivation, and so launched techniques like a toddler throwing candy at a duck, which was to say, very frequently. The end result was Lex watching what looked like an anime battle, but in real life. He understood nothing about the complexities of their fight, but at a glance, Marlowe seemed to be winning. At a certain point in the battle, Brandon opened up his belt and started whipping Marlowe with it, who only laughed as he dodged each attack. This was taking an unusual turn. "Lex, one of your guests wants to speak with you," Mary told him as she munched on holographic popcorn while watching the battle. "Just when it was getting kinky," Lex muttered, before disappearing. At the restaurant in the Midnight Manor, a lonely teenage boy was slumped over one of the tables. There was a club sandwich on a plate beside him, but he had not touched it yet as he was lost in his thoughts. When Lex appeared and saw him, he recognized the boy. He was one of the two teenagers who'd used the inn for a date. He'd been anticipating the return of the two very dramatic kids, but they had not appeared together since. Last time, Aisha appeared alone, and now this time it was Horace. "Dear guest, are you all right?" Lex asked, his voice heavy with concern. Horace was startled by the sudden intrusion, but quickly recovered when he noticed the innkeeper. They had never really met, but he asked the bartender about the owner of this place and learned about the innkeeper. He really didn't know much about the inn, despite coming here before, but only hoped the owner of the place was trustworthy. "I heard you're the owner of this place," Horace said directly. "I have a request for you, and I can pay if I need to." "What do you need?" Lex asked simply. Horace took out a green-colored crystal from his pocket and held it out to the innkeeper. "I came here last time with a girl named Aisha. If she comes back looking for me, can you give her this and tell her I'm being enrolled in Ventura Brown, and that I'll find a way to get to Ventura Silver? I have her picture here so you can recognize her." "No need for a picture, I know Aisha. I will pass along your message if she visits the inn, there's no need for any payment." "Thanks," Horace said, smiling weakly. He stuffed the club sandwich in his mouth, and directly disappeared. It seemed he was in a hurry. Lex stared at the crystal in his hand, and wondered about what the teenager had just said. He was being enrolled somewhere? An academy for cultivators? Interesting. While the standoff between Brandon and Marlowe was one worthy of being contested, between these two kids, there was no point in fighting. Bobber was a chi-training cultivator and Horace had only just entered the body-tempering realm. But the passion of youth did not seek logic, and currently Horace was ready to kill. That is, until Alexander, who was passing by, saw them. He did not recognize them, but the situation was obvious to read. I advise you not to fight here, he said in passing, not paying too much attention to them. Not only will it be pointless, you'll get banned from coming to the inn. If you're really desperate for a fight, go to the battle arena. Despite his anger, Horace controlled himself and sheathed his sword. Bobber, on the other hand, was startled when he saw Alexander. Even before Brandon proclaimed his own family royalty out of jealousy for the attention Marlowe was getting, Alexander was considered a prince on earth. He was strongly admired by his own generation and those near him in age, and Bobber was no exception. Though technically Bobber could also be considered a prince due to his ancient heritage, he did not behave arrogantly in front of the real deal. His attitude became even more docile when he thought of the reason he even came to this inn. Excuse me for the crass display, Your Grace, Bobber said promptly, completely ignoring Horace. Don't worry about it, Alexander said. Your Grace, would it be possible to talk for a moment, Bobber said, quickly catching up to Alexander who was already leaving. I have a message for you from Russian Princess 77. Bobber almost blushed as he said the name. Not only had he been beaten up badly by a prank she pulled, but later, through a series of coincidences, he ended up working for her. Alexander paused and turned to look at Bobber. Russian Princess 77 had been a great help to him many times, and he took her very seriously, but at the same time, he still knew next to nothing about her. This might be a good opportunity to resolve that issue. Alexander eyed Horace, who was standing nearby, and said, Follow me. After walking a short distance, he asked, What's the message? Russian Princess 77 said that she has some information that will greatly influence your future. If you want to hear it, then you have to agree to owe her a favor. Alexander thought about this for a moment, but then eventually nodded and said, All right, I'll owe her. What's the information? She said it's very important that you enter the new minor realm that will open on Earth as early as possible, the one gifted by the inn. She says that if you miss this, you'll lose someone very important in your life without any way of getting them back. Alexander frowned as he ruminated on her exact words. The phrasing mattered immensely. Still, he had some time to think this over before the realm opened. For now, he looked back at Bobber and smiled. So you're her friend, he asked, as he thought of ways to extract information about her. If Lex did not have the power of the host attire, he would never be able to keep up with this fight. He was expecting to see some new forms of fighting, but the direction this fight had taken was very surprising. Marlowe, in his new form of cultivation, had lost access to spiritual energy as well as spiritual techniques, but instead gained various bloodline abilities. Brandon, on the other hand, was practically the poster child for conventional cultivation, and so launched techniques like a toddler throwing candy at a duck, which was to say, very frequently. The end result was Lex watching what looked like an anime battle, but in real life. He understood nothing about the complexities of their fight, but at a glance, Marlowe seemed to be winning. At a certain point in the battle, Brandon opened up his belt and started whipping Marlowe with it, who only laughed as he dodged each attack. This was taking an unusual turn. Lex, one of your guests wants to speak with you, Mary told him as she munched on holographic popcorn while watching the battle. Just when it was getting kinky, Lex muttered, before disappearing. At the restaurant in the Midnight Manor, a lonely teenage boy was slumped over one of the tables. There was a club sandwich on a plate beside him, but he had not touched it yet as he was lost in his thoughts. When Lex appeared and saw him, he recognized the boy. He was one of the two teenagers who'd used the inn for a date. He'd been anticipating the return of the two very dramatic kids, but they had not appeared together since. Last time, Aisha appeared alone, and now this time it was Horace. Dear guest, are you alright? Lex asked, his voice heavy with concern. Horace was startled by the sudden intrusion, but quickly recovered when he noticed the innkeeper. They had never really met, but he asked the bartender about the owner of this place and learned about the innkeeper. He really didn't know much about the inn, despite coming here before, but only hoped the owner of the place was trustworthy. I heard you're the owner of this place, Horace said directly. I have a request for you, and I can pay if I need to. What do you need? Lex asked simply. Horace took out a green-colored crystal from his pocket and held it out to the innkeeper. I came here last time with a girl named Aisha. If she comes back looking for me, can you give her this and tell her I'm being enrolled in Ventura Brown, and that I'll find a way to get to Ventura Silver? I have her picture here so you can recognize her. No need for a picture, I know Aisha. I will pass along your message if she visits the inn, there's no need for any payment. Thanks, Horace said, smiling weakly. He stuffed the club sandwich in his mouth, and directly disappeared. It seemed he was in a hurry. Lex stared at the crystal in his hand, and wondered about what the teenager had just said. He was being enrolled somewhere? An academy for cultivators? Interesting. Chapter 198 Tickets. Lex eventually put the crystal away without investigating it further and told Mary to let him know whenever Aisha came into the inn again. He scanned the arena, and the fight was still going on. Lex returned and watched the fight, but fortunately, it ended without anyone getting hurt. Just as Lex had hoped, the pirates were greatly intimidated by the fight and behaved well while they were at the inn. Without wasting any time, they made their way to the guild room under Buddha's insistence, where they ran into Chen and Lily. Unexpectedly, to both the pirates and the siblings, the two parties immediately became interested in each other's goods. The pirates sold many of the rare metals they'd just stolen to the siblings, and put up the rest of the goods they were willing to sell in the guild room. In exchange, they purchased hundreds of zombie cores. This was a good opportunity for the siblings, as zombie cores were a business they would soon lose, as the planet was almost free of zombies. With these rare metals, as well as the accumulated wealth, they could start planning for their future. As fruitful as it was to make money like this, their ultimate pursuit was still as warriors. The pirates had finally been convinced to use the inn as one of the ways they sold their stolen goods, but a one-time deal was not good enough. If their goods continued to sell, they would consider making the inn their permanent spot, but for now they were still testing waters. Lex had already earned a few thousand MP just from the charges on this single transaction, so he hoped they decided to come back. With their work done, they left, and Lex's peaceful days once again resumed. During this time, Lex focused on his cultivation and improving the inn. Using his Leo persona, he had put up some requests in the guild room for various techniques for the Chi training realm, but while some people offered to sell him some techniques, he was never satisfied with their descriptions. A few days later, news spread that the minor realm that Earth had been awarded by the inn had finally appeared in Iceland. Many of the guests at the inn from Earth left, as everyone was curious about it, with Alexander being one of them. A couple of days after that, representatives of the council appeared at the inn, followed by Fernanda, and had a meeting with the family heads and eventually reached an agreement. It appeared that the new realm was much bigger than anyone had imagined, and besides a few of the starting regions, none of the Earthlings could proceed. They reached some kind of resolution, and eventually all the family heads finally also left the inn, along with the Morrisons as well. Other than a few random guests that appeared every so often, the inn only had a few dozen guests left who had been staying for a while now. One may think that Lex would be upset at the slowed-down business, but this suited him perfectly as the Viper Vine was still growing. 1 week later, the vine had reached the peak of the Foundation realm, and could spread as far as 500 acres. Soon, it would reach the Golden Core realm, after which its progress would slow down. This was because Lex, as well as the greenhouse, lacked the necessary resources to speed up its growth beyond this level. Lex was already dumbstruck when he learned that the turtle had been having the gardener cry above the vine as his tears seemed to help and put a stop to it. Although he was in a hurry, he wasn't that desperate, right? Fenrir had also started coming out of its depressed and introverted phase, and could often be seen playing with Little Blue in the forest. Its strength had also grown to the Chi training realm. At this point, as progress was slowing down, Lex finally started planning for the future of the inn again. Hey Mary, is there any way to I don't know, to be more specific in the kind of planet I search for to connect to the inn? What do you mean? I mean, I'd like to connect to a planet without almost dying for once. If we can connect to one of the planets being ruled by the Jotun Empire, or anyone else who has a decent security or civilization in place will work. Mary laughed at hearing Lex's request explained. No, there's nothing that specific, but you can be a little more targeted. Previously, you were using golden tickets, which not only have a wide range, but are free from many restrictions. You can buy cheaper tickets for your next expansion that have more restrictions. The drawback will be the time to connect the inn to the planet will be longer, but at least the list of planets you'll get will be more reasonable for your level. Lex rubbed his hands in the typical evil villain fashion as he thought about what to do, and checked his options in the system. Alexander leaned against a tree as he took deep, heavy breaths. He was covered in the blood of yet another monster he killed, and his entire armor suffered a great deal of damage. That's right, monster, not beast. This minor realm was filled with strange and unusual things he could never even imagine, and his understanding of living things underwent a huge drastic change. But the monsters made of rocks and metal and even dirt aside, it was the monsters made of materials he didn't recognize that gave him a tough time. He thought the Midnight Games had been tough, but at least there he only fought enemies in his own realm. Here, there was no guarantee of what he might encounter next. Just as he was about to move forward, a bright light in the distance caught his eye. He turned to look at what appeared to be the ruins of some kind of temple and saw a giant portal. In front of the portal, he saw a familiar figure, trying to resist the pull but failing. Helen! Alexander roared in a panic, as he started sprinting towards her, but she was too far and his voice did not carry. What the hell was she doing here? Unlike him, Helen was not a fighter, and had no training except the most basic self-defense, so how could she even reach here? As these thoughts ran through his mind, and as he sprinted towards her, he watched in horror as she was pulled into the portal before the portal shut down. She had disappeared before his very eyes. Despite receiving a warning before this realm even opened, Alexander could not stop his friend from disappearing, potentially forever. Chapitre 199 Spiritual Technique. Lex was sitting in his lawn chair, sipping a smoothie as he surfed the system. Lately, he had begun avoiding relaxing in public to maintain his mysterious persona. But after Lex decided to be more approachable rather than mysterious, he had returned to lounging in the open. The first day he had done this, his guests avoided him, but by now they had gotten used to it. His horse-sized pup was lightly snoring beside him, attracting loving gazes from many of his guests. Lex was not paying attention to that, however, as he was currently looking up the kinds of tickets he could buy. The golden ticket he used previously was the most expensive one available to him, at 100 million MP. The reason why it was so expensive was because not only did it have the greatest range, it resulted in the fastest connection between the system and the world, and was capable of searching for extremely powerful worlds, such as the 5-star world Lex came across called Dunya. The cheapest ticket available was only 100,000 MP. This was incredibly cheap considering how expensive some of the things Lex purchased were, not to mention that it could still cover vast distances in space. It had many shortcomings, but somehow ended up being perfect for Lex. First of all, it was restricted to 1-star planets only. Secondly, Lex would have to pick one of the planets he was already connected to, and the ticket would only search within the same galaxy. Thirdly, being there were any beings too strong on the planet, it would interfere with the detection and so the ticket would be unable to detect the planet, depending on the strength of the person. Fourthly, the shortest amount of time it would take to connect the planet was about a week. The last point was not one Lex counted in his favor, as a week was still the shortest available time for the connection to be completed. Although he was thinking of getting this ticket, he hadn't bought it yet. Lex would not go anywhere unprepared, and he was still not ready. For one, he had only finally managed to purchase a few techniques for the chi-gathering realm. They had not come from the guild room, but rather from John. He visited John in with his Leo persona and described exactly what kind of techniques he was looking for, and had John make them to his needs and specifications. Lex had asked for 2 different attacking techniques, 1 defensive technique, 1 to improve his speed and 1 to hide. Until Lex learnt all techniques to a satisfactory level, he would not even think of going to another planet. This was also not considering the fact that he needed a lot of new equipment as well, some of which he had ordered from Chen and some from Will. Done perusing the system, Lex stretched a bit, nodded to some of his nearby guests and returned to his apartment with Fenrir. He changed into the bathrobe and entered his meditation room. Considering Lex had never learnt any spiritual techniques before, he expected it would be difficult. For most of them, that was true. For the defensive technique, however, a single glance was all it took for Lex to learn it to the maximum proficiency possible. Even Lex himself was dumbstruck by how easy it had been. But, it made sense. Regal Embrace had only just begun to show its worth, and not only had Lex's defense improved, his understanding of anything related to defense had also improved. But, practicing the defensive technique made it much easier to practice the others, as it gave him a deep understanding how these techniques actually worked. Lex was currently at Chi Training Level 3. There were a total of 9 levels in the Chi Training realm, and with each realm Lex would hold an increasing number of Chi in his body. To use these techniques, he would need to manipulate the Chi in his body along certain pathways, these being the meridians, in certain patterns in very exact amounts to give birth to various phenomena. Why these phenomena were birthed was a topic of a different study. It was like asking why a magnetic field was created by passing electricity through a wire. The why of it was completely irrelevant to someone who was an electromagnet to perform a task. This person only needed to know how to turn the magnet on and off, not the hows and whys behind it. This was currently the situation for Lex with these techniques. He did not understand the complexities behind the techniques, but memorized the techniques themselves. The defensive technique was called Chi Repulsor. It worked by building up charged Chi anywhere on Lex's body, and when the built-up Chi encountered a sufficient force, it would release a pulse of Chi that would push back against the force. For example, if an enemy were punching Lex, and Lex blocked it with his hand that had been charged with Chi Repulsor, the released pulse of Chi would either neutralize a lot of the punch's force, or in the case that the pulse was stronger than the attack, push the enemy back. This type was a very standard defensive technique for chi cultivators, as they did not yet have enough chi to launch techniques far from their bodies. If Lex had to learn this himself, it would take him a long time, as not only did he have to run sufficient chi strands at very specific speeds in very specific patterns near the area where he wanted to use the technique, he then had to control the built-up chi that was outside his body, something incredibly difficult for chi training cultivators who were only just learning to control chi within their bodies. But by understanding and practicing such a complex technique repeatedly using his over-the-top proficiency in it, he eventually got the hang of how to properly manipulate chi within his body. It was an extremely novel experience, and he loved it. Occasionally missing content, please report errors in time. Chapter 200 Misbehaving Chi. Despite being thoroughly familiar with the technique, Lex continuously practiced it for over an hour. He practiced gathering the chi for chi repulsor on various parts of his body, from his palms to his chest to his legs and even his forehead. Only when he was completely drained of his chi did he finally stop. Tired and sweaty, Lex went and took a nice long shower, before he re-equipped the bathrobe and returned to the meditation room. Sitting cross-legged, he started cultivating using regal embrace. Each cultivation style was different, and would slightly transform the absorbed chi into the unique form of chi each cultivator contained within their body. For people who had affinities, such as Will Bentham who had a water affinity, the chi or spiritual energy they stored in their body would be more concentrated and special. The chi in Lex's body, though, was on an entirely different level. It contained aspects of spiritual energy, soul energy, and vitality. This unique combination of aspects meant that Lex was not limited to only using spirit techniques, though at the moment he only had access to those. It meant he could also use his chi to use the rare and especially potent soul techniques, as well as the special techniques of body cultivators. While a normal cultivator would have to build up a reserve of each respective type of energy to use the techniques associated, Lex could use all three directly using his chi. This also made his chi more potent than that of his peers, though this potency was displayed in a form of resilience instead of attacking power. The bright side of this was, since he was technically drawing from three sources while people only drew from one, he could replenish his chi faster. The drawback of this was that each of his breakthroughs would be 3 times as hard as an ordinary cultivator. Lex had personally experienced this difficulty while trying to cultivate these past few days. But Lex wasn't trying to cultivate right now, he was only replenishing his chi so that he could practice his techniques. He scanned the inn once, to ensure nothing required his attention, and then resumed his training. The next technique he practiced was the one he found easiest after chi repulsor, which was the technique to increase his speed. It was called Falcon's Relief. Instead of focusing on something like the legs, the chi was focused around the heart and the lungs. The effect was not something as mundane as ensuring he got plenty of oxygen in his blood, no. By focusing on those 2 areas, the chi would slowly dissolve from his meridians into his blood, and provide him with an overall boost in speed, not just in his legs, but everywhere. He could run faster, but he could also attack faster, turn faster, eat faster or digest faster. What he wanted to speed up was up to him. The duration of the technique lasted as long as all the chi did not dissolve into the blood. Whether Lex used that for an increase in burst speed or long-distance running or something else was entirely up to him. But while this was the next easiest technique after chi repulsor, it didn't mean it was actually easy at all. In fact, while Lex had barely started using it after a few days' practice, he could say for certain that without the meditation room and bathrobe helping him concentrate and learn faster, it would have taken him much longer. Learning these techniques also gave him a new respect for all the fights he saw previously, because using the techniques while you're standing still was one thing, but using it while also doing any other action was incredibly difficult. But Lex was not too hard on himself. He had only just begun training and it made sense that he was bad. He especially could not fathom how people used multiple techniques at the same time. But Lex was getting ahead of himself. He had to take things one step at a time and focused on Falcon's Relief. The hours flowed by like grains of sand falling in an hourglass, and by the time night fell, Lex was extremely tired. Not only was he drained of his chi, he even felt physically and mentally exhausted. Taking yet another shower, he wasn't unhygienic. Lex proceeded to eat some food. At this point, he exclusively only ate spirit food as it helped him replenish his chi passively, and even slowly helped him increase his cultivation. Once he was done, Lex threw himself onto his bed and instantly passed out. The next morning, before he could even ask, Mary let him know that Alexander wanted to meet with him. The meeting was short, as Alexander wanted to know if Lex could track Helen. Lex obviously could not do that, and said so in a diplomatic way. Alexander then asked if there was anywhere in the universe that was blocked from accessing the inn, as Helen had disappeared through a portal, yet had not returned to the inn using a golden key. Lex assured him the inn could be accessed from anywhere, according to what Mary told him. He did not spend more time with Alexander, as the kid seemed troubled by his own thoughts and Lex had his own tasks to complete. Once again, Lex started the day by practicing chi repulsor, then spent the rest of the day practicing falcon's relief. By the end of the day, Lex was able to use the technique and also run at the same time, a huge achievement as it required an immense level of multitasking. The following day, Lex practiced falcon's relief for half the day, before moving on to his two offensive techniques. The two techniques, Chi Blade and Auxiliary Burst, were very difficult for Lex to master. It was not just the inherent complexity of the techniques that overwhelmed him, he felt like Regal Embrace was giving off an inherent disgust for the techniques. He could feel it in the way his chi would misbehave whenever he tried to practice. But instead of being discouraged, the challenge somehow increased his motivation. Instead of trying to develop the techniques as instincts or reflexes, he practiced them mindfully. He paid extra attention to the speed, density and flexibility of each strand of chi while he practiced the technique, and learned to anticipate when and how his chi would misbehave, and ended up learning the techniques even faster than falcon's relief. That only left his final technique for Lex to learn, simply called Mirage. Mirage could help him hide by camouflaging him and making him difficult to detect using sight, but currently, Lex was unable to master it. This wasn't simply because of the complexity of the technique, it was also the scale of the technique as well as the amount of chi required to use it. Since he had to cover his whole body while using the technique, the scale was bigger than anything Lex had done previously, and the amount of chi was nearly everything he had in his body. At this point, he went back to John for some consultation. As much as Lex would like to do everything on his own, it just wasn't possible. Receiving the guidance of those more experienced than him would make the learning process drastically easier. In his Leo persona, he demonstrated each of the techniques to John, as well as talked about his experiences while learning the techniques. John was secretly very impressed by Leo's speed, but did not let it show. Was he learning multiple techniques within a single month? No, it had not even been 2 weeks yet. When Lex explained how he managed to learn the two offensive techniques, John's eyes shone and he realized something, but did not say anything yet. John spent a good few hours explaining his mistakes to Lex, and instructing him on how he should proceed with his practice in the future. Once he was done with that, though, John sat down comfortably in his chair and stared at Lex for a few moments while he considered something. In the end, he let out a sigh and said, "Young Leo, are you familiar with arrays?" "Yeah, aren't those the formations used to protect places and stuff? I heard we had some guests who stayed at the inn for a long time because back on their planet, their return location had been surrounded by them." "My young friend, never say something so illiterate again," John said as he chuckled at Leo's lack of understanding. To a layman, indeed formations and arrays are the same thing. This is because both of them have the same origin, and often a person who is a master in one, is usually also a master in the other. But arrays and formations, while occasionally similar in effect, have vastly different purposes. Formations make use of various items, some manufactured and some natural, along with the intricate and complex knowledge of the science of cause and effect to give birth to various effects. They can be defensive in nature, or offensive, or auxiliary, or even a mix of the three. Arrays, however, are made completely and only of spiritual energy. John watched Leo, who was paying complete attention to his words, but for some reason lost the will to say more. He handed Lex a ring and said, "Insert your chi into this and you'll be able to read the book inside. Let me know what you think." "Sure," Leo answered, feeling unsure about why John brought all this up. But he went along with it anyway.